move. Here we go.
And it is a Sicilian, not the Najdorf, not his speciality, Vachier-Lagrave, where he has been quite predictable historically throughout his whole career. Instead, it's knight c6 and move 2, and Magnus doesn't go for any open Sicilians. He plays the more positional, the slower bishop to b5. And actually, we're more used to seeing colours reversed. I've seen battles between Carlsen and Vachier-Lagrave in this position with colours switched, with Magnus taking on the black side of this opening. Fascinating start to this one, Tanya. Not his usual, but still an area of expertise.
Yeah, and bishop b5, the Rosalimo, very solid approach against the Sicilian. Now Magnus wants to break in the center with d4, but when there is a recapture on d4, you want to take back with the pawn to keep control of the center. This was an opening, David, that was made so popular in the 2018 World Championship match as a fight against that knight c6 move that we saw from Maxime. This is game 1 of game 4, so the players are also feeling the opening, the rhythm out right now. And I think for Magnus, he wants to check a little bit. Is Maxime going to stick to the old guns, his usual repertoire, or does he have something special planned?
Yeah, he definitely feels like he's had something special planned so far. Vachier-Lagrave, really impressive speed to the opening. And look at this, all 4 pawns in the center. It's a really rare situation, this kind of Mexican standoff. Neither side wants to blink or flinch here, but you have to break that tension, and it looks like black is ready.
Wow. Yeah, this is a bit of a face-off in the center, and Magnus decides to capture the e5 pawn, hitting that knight, so black has to recapture on e4, the other central pawn. Now, that pawn on e5, David, is a bit of a weakness. It is a target for black. Is it time to trade off that knight on c6?
It might well be. Black has a clear plan, a clear potential threat just to take this pawn. Either you have to kind of take defensive action, and actually this might run into some tactics. I was going to say, maybe you just defend this pawn with a move like bishop to f4, but suddenly, bang, knight takes pawn, and a double attack. Another theme of the day, hitting the king, and this check will pick up white's bishop next. Black will have won a pawn. Interest in this little transition. So I think your move pretty much forced Tanya here. Bishop to f4 would be a huge mistake. First, just eliminating this knight. Not just that, but getting rid of this hanging bishop. I think he has to play it. Magnus pausing though.
Oh, he finds another way.
Finds another way. Okay. He's getting rid of this threat against f2.
Yeah, he doesn't want to give up the bishop pair so easy. Now you can't take that pawn on f2, the tactics that you pointed out, because that white bishop on b5 is defended with the knight. On the other hand, Magnus himself starts attacking the center, the black central pawn on d5. It was hard to find knight c3, but of course Magnus does it, and when he does, I kind of like it more than giving up that bishop.
Yeah, definitely. He is wrecking his own pawn structure slightly, Magnus Carlsen. If we see a trade of knights, isolated pawns do come back to haunt you potentially in future. But right now, it looks like white's activity, white's dynamism more than compensates for that. The bishop comes out to f4, very nice square, or g5, hitting the black queen, and Magnus looks sleepy.
What's going on with him? Magnus arrives at the game looking like he's just woken up, and has he gone into a bit of a power nap mode here?
I know how he feels. It's been a long day of chess, but...
oh, yeah.
Magnus, yeah, this is strange. This is maybe means for optimism. Vachier-Lagrave, do you think he has the camera on, seeing Magnus so sleepy like this?
And I think for Maxime, if he does, that's a good sign, because once you get this feeling that your opponent, your rival is not fresh enough, it's time to strike early. You can start looking for those opportunities. And very often Magnus in his interviews has actually said that his opponents don't take advantage of that early opportunity, of that early momentum. So if Magnus does become a bit sleepy or give those chances to Maxime, he needs to be up for it. But yeah, wow, what's going on with Magnus there?
Yeah, the sudden reaction, very strange behavior here. Maybe not liking his position, maybe it's not the fact that he's tired, maybe it's just a lack of enthusiasm for the position because Vachier-Lagrave came so well prepared. But either way, I think your point is really essential here. You have to strike Magnus early. Was that a yawn? Covering his eyes here. I think he hates his position this much, or he... yeah, something's up with Magnus.
Yeah, David, you're his good friend. Do you know something that we don't?
No comment, Tanya. But either way, black has a good position, and the fact that Magnus isn't enjoying it, yeah, really surprising. You have to hit him hard, though. You have to hit him fast before he wakes up, before he perks up, and starts kind of going up the gears, getting into top form. If Magnus takes the lead in this match, I do fear for Maxime's chances. Maxime doesn't have the kind of must-win opening repertoire. that some of the other top players have potentially. But he does play the move queen to b6, so similar to an idea we pointed out, this hit on the f2 point and some tactics, some tricks in the air. White has to be a bit careful here.
Yeah, because you're hitting that pawn on f2, but not just that. You're also hitting that knight on c3, which is a key defender for that bishop on b5. So a multi-purpose move, and the first natural response that came to my mind, David, was to develop that bishop on c1, get it to e3 to stop that threat of queen f2. But I think the problem here is that black has the intermezzo of capturing on c3 instead of running away with the queen. And after all these trades that we see with white capturing the queen on b6, black recapturing the queen on d1, you actually end up with an extra piece, and it all works out in black's favor after picking up that bishop on b6. So queen b6 does require Magnus to slow down and calculate a few lines. The first question, how do you fight this threat? And Magnus answers it, develops his queen to e2, not only defending the f2 pawn, but the bishop on b5.
Yeah, anything black can do, white can do as well. Black attacks two pieces with his queen, the f2 pawn, the b5 bishop. So white's queen says, okay, it's time for me to start work, and defending f2, defending b5. Multi-purpose move there. I'm just wondering when this pawn is going to drop off the board. I don't think it can be captured right now because white has a big threat of knight takes d5. So black either has to eliminate the attacker of that pawn by trading knights. We said this maybe favors white because suddenly black's most active piece has disappeared, or black has to just up sticks and bring his bishop out just to defend this pawn in the center. So keep the tension or break the tension. That's the dilemma for Maxime Vachier-Lagrave.
I like this. I like the concept of keeping the tension. Also, Maxime, his middle name is Chaos, is Nerves. It's actually Vachier, but it could very well be Chaos because we've seen the kind of chess he plays. But David, just looking at this natural developing move that you pointed out, bishop to e6, it would mean that you have to calculate all these lines where what happens if white was to trade one set of knights on e4, then the other set of knight on c6. But instead of going into any of that, he chooses a different approach of defending the d5 pawn with the rook. But the question still remains, what happens if white was to capture on e4, then the knight on c6, and then the pawn on e4?
Yeah, it does in essence look like a pawn sacrifice. And just to follow that variation you were mentioning, Tanya, knight takes knight here. The white bishop now has to take the black knight. There's no time to take this pawn in the center, remember, because the white bishop would hang. The white queen needs to defend its bishop. And if we follow this line right to the bitter end, then we would see a trade of queens. And at the end, black would give a check. And the problem for white is, yes, you can stay a pawn up, you can move your king off the back rank, but you're tied down forever on the first rank. White's bishop is pinned to the rook. I don't think you can ever break this bind. Black's bishop will come out, black's rook will come to attack and maybe even win this bishop. And the alternative, the only alternative would be a sad retreat, whereupon a trade of rooks would allow black to regain the pawn. And we talk about the might of the two bishops quite regularly at top level because it is decisive here. Black's bishop is so strong on this diagonal, soon joined by its counterpart on f5. And I think the might of these two bishops, for example, okay, I'm not going to lose a pawn, but let's say in a position like this, it's just overwhelming. White's two pieces cannot fight, especially on the light squares, and black would have a decisive advantage. So, yeah, long variation. Magnus will realize it's a wrong variation right now, going for all of those trades. But what else to do? Maybe it is time to develop this bishop still sleeping at home.
Because with that last move that Maxime just made, now it's a big threat to actually capture the pawn on e5. He's defended his own pawn on d5. So knight e5 in the air. Again, two options, right? You develop your dark squared bishop to f4 to defend that e5 pawn, or do you give up your light squared bishop on c6? I do like bishop f4. I like my bishop pair.
Yeah, me too, Tanya. I'm very biased towards the bishops. One of my strengths, but also one of my big weaknesses in chess. And bishop takes knight would give a healthy position, but it would also part with the bishop pair. Let's allow Magnus to decide on this strategically. Do you feel he's woken up? He looks slightly more alive on the camera, Tanya.
He needs to wake up because there are threats on the board and he has to counter them accurately. And when you're playing against a player like Maxime, you really can't give too many chances because Maxime will be on top of any opportunity that he gets in this game.
Yeah. Leaning back there, Maxime. You were talking about bishops versus knights. Since this is the AI Cup, doesn't AI really like one of them? And I don't remember which one.
At least Alpha Zero loves the bishop pair when they're together. I think bishops versus knights alone, it depends on the pawn structure, but when it's two bishops together, computer's very, very biased.
And you know Magnus, he's biased towards knights. He loves his knights and he hates his opponent's knights. He does decide to actually give up the bishop for that knight on c6. But I think it's In modern chess, general principles, more than that, it's about the concrete position you have. In general, if it's an open position, you want the bishop pair. If it's a blocked position, knights are considered better pieces because they're short-range pieces. They can jump around easy, land on those holes, but bishop needs, long-range pieces need more space to move around. And it's also personal preference. Vachier-Lagrave, also known for his love for knights.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
But so you're saying the general rules can only get you so far in chess?
You have to be a bit flexible. You need to know the general rules too, as well. So.
And then play around with them.
Yeah, and then you need to know the rules before you break the rules. That's the key in general.
Well said, David Howell. Well said.
But I think it's a stylistic thing. Knights are favoured by attacking players, dynamic players, tricksters. Bishops are favoured by old men. And okay, a trade of a set of knights, and now it is the bishop pair against bishop and knight. So we will find out the truth. At least in this exact position, this specific scenario with this structure. Magnus wants to conquer the dark squares. Black has a light squared bishop unchallenged. He'll most likely control that color complex, but if he can trade off the dark squared bishops, white does have a queen and knight combo. Watch out for some attack. Magnus slightly low on the clock, but I think he's starting to be happier with his position.
Yeah, and you can see why, right? You're pointing out all these ideas of white actually neutralizing the bishop pair on his terms, either with the move bishop to 8-6 or bishop to f6. And either of these trades could actually give white a lot of attacking chances. And then coming to your point of stylistically, Magnus with his knight having the queens on the board, I think this is where you start smelling that, there are possibilities, there are dynamics that exist, and you start getting a little excited about your position. The knight from s3 can also land on d4, a nice little spot. You really want to provoke black to push that c6 pawn to c5 to try and kick that out, because then that gives you weaknesses in the center of the board with, pawns that can be targets.
Yeah, definitely, and one of the most typical mating patterns, especially kind of at the lower levels, would be, for example, let's give black let's make a slightly strange move. It would be, for example, allowing a pawn to f6. This is the one thing black cannot do. Cannot give away access to the dark squares. Suddenly, this pawn acts as a protector of the g7 square, and, for example, the queen jumping in. This is the kiss of death checkmate, if I remember correctly, where the queen will come in and deliver checkmate to the black king. So the one thing Vachier-Lagrave has to watch out for. Therefore, he does clear the 6th rank, so he controls f6. But Tanya, you mentioned that this pawn might be vulnerable. It looks like a gift here from Vachier-Lagrave. What is the plan?
When we're talking about Maxime, he's all about the initiative in the position, and we also mentioned how the bishop pairs, long-range pieces, love open diagonals. Maxime is actually voluntarily giving up a central pawn here so that he opens up space for his light-squared bishop. Once the bishop comes to b7, you can really imagine the power of these two bishops. Gets a lot of counterplay. The game, of course, goes on, and the Valbar says that white's doing absolutely fine, but it brings in the kind of dynamics that Maxime is looking for. Really concrete, nice approach there, instead of just sitting still and going passive against a player like Magnus.
Yeah, really fascinating, and I once commentated with Magnus on an event, and he said any pawn that is lost or that you blunder means open lines for your pieces. So you got to look on the bright side. Maxime sacrificing a pawn here, but only opening lines up for black's bishops, for black's rooks.
Do you think Magnus is going to take this?
Ooh, he's reluctant. When his opponent so willingly throws a pawn at him, Magnus, I don't think he wants to take the bait, but maybe it's just the best move. After all, a pawn is a pawn, as they say. Take the material and cling onto it.
And we've got the Valbar telling us, right, that you're absolutely fine after grabbing that pawn on d5, but when you're playing the position and you see the black bishop jumping into this powerful spot on b7 with a tempo against the queen, also x-raying that knight on f3, you've got to be reluctant about these decisions.
Yeah. How materialistic would you say you are, Tanya Kaya, in chess and in life?
I am very materialistic. I just dread losing anything.
Tanya?
Oh, wow. That's such a heavy question, especially the one about life. But I think on the chessboard, I'll be honest, David, if this was a position in my game, I don't think I would take on d5. I would probably try and look for ways to actually trade off those dark squared bishops. So either bishop 8-6 or ideas like queen to f4 and insisting on bishop f6. Yes, of course, we did see the line, and the Valbar approves of queen d5, but I don't think I would go for it in a practical game. Yeah. What about you?
I would have taken the pawn because I'm greedy. Anything free
Wow,
in life and in chess.
Bishop f6?
Bishop f6, yeah. He's trying to give the pawn rather than take the pawn here, Magnus Carlsen. Anything you can do, I can do better, he's saying. And he's trying to go for this checkmate plan that we mentioned. Let's show the idea here. We thought that the black queen had cleared the 6th rank now to cover this square, but Magnus insists he drops his bishop in, and now taking this bishop would be highly risky for black. Notice how the rooks stare off at each other. Black's rook temporarily undefended. If we see a trade of rooks and black's, well, evaluation bar jumping, if black's queen now does feast on this pawn, then it would end in disaster. White's queen only now takes, and suddenly this rook is pretty much trapped. The rook has to slide across to b8, but white conquers the back rank, and I'm not sure what the killer blow is here, but white is winning. Maybe you just take this pawn going for checkmate against the king.
So instructive and so much to learn from here, because I was talking about how I want to trade off the dark squared bishop and trying to defend that square. That Magnus Carlsen shows the way. He says you can just calculate the line and based on tactics, make these positional decisions. I really like the move bishop to f6, countering this pawn sacrifice that Maxime offered. And now, if you can't really take that pawn on f6, well, he does take the bishop, and is he just going to develop his own bishop, defending that rook on e8? Yes, he does it.
Yeah, connecting rooks. I was going to say the most satisfying move in chess is a move your opponent thinks they have stopped, and then you play it anyway, and they're like, whoa, that's not possible. But Maxime, of course, recovers very quickly, and he defends. Now the threat is on to take this pawn. He's covered his back rank. Always cover your back rank in chess. That's the most important.
Is there any chance that white, very far advanced pawn, will survive? Oof.
If he can keep it alive, he might deliver checkmate.
Yes. That's a dangerous pawn on the board. And also things work out for black here, because another mating pattern, as you said, kiss of death, queen on g7, is queen and knight combining to give a mate on h7. But the good thing for Maxime is that if white actually jumps to h6 right now, you can capture the pawn on f6, because knight g5, David, is met by the queen coming back and defending the king side, keeping everything together.
Yeah, king and queen. A queen is the best defender if she's able to participate in the defense, and this would end in disaster for Magnus Carlsen. So his fractured pawn structure, this pawn we talked about on f6, is either very good or it's very bad. So Magnus has to maybe just keep it intact. I don't know if you should maybe just defend this pawn, keep it alive for future attacks. But either way, I'm starting to like black's position, as long as he doesn't fall for any of these tricks that we've been pointing out. Magnus slightly lower on the clock as well, getting dramatic.
It's getting dramatic, and one gets the feeling that if this is a long strategic battle, then black does have the trumps. With that f6 pawn as a weakness in any endgame that would arise, black would get chances. But Magnus, he either needs to trade that f6 pawn for the central d5 pawn, but I like your idea of keeping it alive. Queen to g5 would be the first move that I would consider here, David. Because to me, f6, as long as queens are on the board, feels like a strength. And wow, tactics again. Magnus says not from g5, but I'm going to defend my pawn from f4, because now that pawn is untouchable. You capture on f6, you win a pawn, but you're going to lose that bishop on f5.
Yeah, indirect defense of the f6 pawn. This is really, really sneaky stuff. Cunning play by Magnus Carlsen. He looks like this queen and pawn are kind of disconnected. The connection between them broken here. But as you point out, Tanya, queen takes pawn, walks into a pin. You win the pinned piece, the bishop, because the queen behind is attacked. It is undefended as well. So queen f4, what a move. These top players, they just surprise us on every single turn. Queen f4, not an obvious one, but Maxime doesn't, of course, have to take this pawn yet. He can play around. The problem is you are facing the kind of idea of the pawn coming up to g4, hitting the bishop. Stuff is happening on the king side. Something is brewing here. How does Maxime Vachier-Lagrave continue to defend so accurately?
Does it feel like a game that will end up with a winner?
It feels that way at the moment. A draw still kind of a distant dream for both players. Any endgame would favour black, because a bishop is better with pawns on both sides of the board. We saw in the last game between Jan Nepomniachtchi and Firouzja that a knight struggles when there are pawns on both flanks. Black with a superior pawn structure as well. If the queens disappear, there's no checkmate, and black is very happy.
So long term, Maxime can be happy, but he needs to get to that long term situation. Magnus, really interesting idea that you pointed out for him, David, with that g pawn advancing forward, g4, g5, and then that f6 pawn is safe forever. And we can imagine the queen landing onto that h6 square from that h4 point. So things are getting tricky. Endgames are far off, and I agree with Kaya that I don't know in whose favor again, but I think a decisive result is most likely here.
Yeah, and these two, I mean, I remember them playing against each other 20-odd years ago. I mean, I sound like an old man there, but they always seem to have these really fascinating battles where both sides seem to be playing for a win. They never play with the reverse gear on. They never play solid, kind of boring, drawish chess. Sometimes it is a draw, but that's because chess has that nature sometimes. But it's always dynamic. And wow, attacking the white queen, jumping in, we see a trade, taking back with the pawn. This is really clever, kicking the white knight away. And where does this white knight run to? Not an easy decision. This knight has 5 or 6 very logical squares. Is Magnus going to jump forward, jump back, jump to the side of the board? Maxime, he's just trying to trade off pieces now to solidify his king. Complicated position still, Tanya. What do you think here?
Really complicated, and the more you look at it, the more you realize how difficult it is to actually make a decision with the knight, the most natural looking square e5. You want to get to the center of the board. But I think that there's a problem with that, David, because once you put your knight on e5, it might be possible for black to actually capture the pawn on f6, because now your knight on e5 is hanging in several situations. And also notice the tender pawn on c3. So if you go g4 with the initial idea, black can start targeting that knight on e5 with the move rook to e8. You take f5, I take e5. If you move the knight away, my queen gets out of the pin with a tempo, winning the c3 pawn.
Yeah, and okay, maybe not grabbing the pawn yet, just because of rook to c1, hitting the queen, then taking the bishop. But I think your exact idea is correct here, Tanya. There might be ways to finesse this. At the very least, you get out the pin, maybe by hitting this knight. It's just complicated, and I think both players are calculating this exact variation right now, because as you mentioned, Magnus would dream of putting his knight on such an active central square. That's where knights belong, in the middle, where they control 8 nice squares there. But tactically, if it doesn't work, you just cannot get away with it, and then you might have to retreat, for example, or might have to land on the edge of the board, or something slightly less desirable.
Yeah, and knight d2, knight h4, not as desirable. The other move that I would be considering is knight to g5, again to try and continue the attack, but it does feel like there should be tactics working for black. Do you see anything here, David, after knight to g5?
Oof. Putting me on the spot here.
Oh, yeah, it's not an easy question, and I was expecting the eval bar to drop really low because knight g5 feels loose, but maybe it's still fine.
You're consistent. You're going maybe for checkmate in the next few turns. This does look pretty scary, and again, it all rests on the fact that whether black can take on f6, eliminating the key attack at that pawn. If white steps forward now, then tactics here.
No, I was thinking queen c3, but I always forget that you've got this move rook to c1, hitting the queen and the bishop.
Yeah, next move, I will pocket this bishop. Maybe it's just, again, like you said earlier, a counterattack against the white knight. And now if the knight just drops back, takes this pawn, for example. Ooh, what next? Maybe queen to h4. I mean, this is crazy. Just pinning and clinging on.
Wow. What a position this is.
Yeah, this one could go either way. These moves are not easy. We're having to pause here. We're hesitating because it's so tricky. These tactics are unique, very rare, these types of patterns. And that's why Magnus now dropping down to 3 minutes.
Anyway, he's less than... Maxime has got twice the amount of time on his clock. Struggling to say things here. But for Magnus, he has to take some big decisions under 3 minutes, and it's quite a messy position. I think for Maxime, it's a bit of a dream start.
Definitely. If he continues to keep this high pace, whoa, knight to e5, we thought this was really risky. But yeah, Maxime keeping this high pace and calculating so well so far, using that maths degree, working out all the tricks, tactics.
Will he take on f6?
I think he will. What's he going to go for? If you don't, then suddenly white does whip up quite a promising attack. Maybe you could start by bringing the black rook to the center and then try and take that pawn next move, but he goes for it.
And look at the speed, David, with which he took. He's just calculated everything. And Magnus has as well, because he immediately responds with knight g4. That does invite black to capture a second pawn.
It does. Magnus used this move knight to g4 yesterday in his successful win against Jan Nepomniachtchi in a different scenario, of course, but now he's attacking the black queen, aiming for some checks. We talk about queen and knight as a attacking combo, but is it worth 2 pawns? I think he's got to go for this. Let's jump in again. Right now, there is tactics, there is chaos on the board. This one is far from a draw because black could go 2 pawns up, hitting this rook in the corner as well. I don't know if white moves the rook. I guess you can. You can also flick in a knight check first, but most likely you have to defend the rook and gain time against the black queen. This is on the board right now. The black queen can choose a bunch of different squares if she centralizes. White's idea is to check. Next move, take this bishop, and we'll get a position such as this one.
You're calling it out. It's happening on the board. Queen d4 played, knight h6. Maxime will step up with the king, and that exposed king will give Magnus enough compensation. The dream would be a rook lift to get into the attack, but notice how the black queen controls key squares for the white rook not to be able to do so.
Aha.
Yeah, centralized queen covers everything. Look how strong she is. She might even defend later on along this diagonal. So black's queen keeping the white rook caged. White can give a check, but it won't be enough. The black king just running. And black is still a pawn up, even if white takes on f5 next move.
Why is Maxime thinking here?
Good question, Tanya.
Is he? What is he considering?
I think he'll move his king up, but he might be just sliding it across to f8. Yeah, odd time to start thinking maybe he's just looking deep into the future. And okay, he eventually does play the move we were expecting. And Magnus will now capture this black bishop before the opportunity disappears. Good air quality for Magnus. At least he's perked up. It feels like he's slightly less lethargic than he was a few moves ago. And king to h8. Nice hiding spot.
Now the f7 pawn is hanging because of that check that Magnus just gave, forcing Maxime's king to that h8 square. So queen f7 is a threat. And not just the f7 pawn, the c5 one as well weak.
Who would you pick here, Tanya?
I kind of like white's position. Despite being down a pawn, I think it's time for Maxime to find a way to just bail out to safety here. And I think he's trying to do that. Well, don't grab on e3 right now. F takes e3 would be a huge blunder after queen takes pawn. You're going to end up losing a rook.
Yeah, double attacks. Do not take on e3 if you're Magnus Carlsen.
Or anyone.
Or anyone. But what else to do? How does Magnus guide this game towards safety? Remember, he's still a pawn down, and if you can't take this pawn, it might continue advancing down the board.
Yeah, but I don't know who's playing for a win or who's playing to bail out over here anymore.
Yeah, I love this comment from the Twitch chat. It feels like Magnus has been preparing traps, of course, but Vachier-Lagrave setting traps too. Both players just playing really high quality chess here. The bar, despite how complicated it's been, it's barely moved.
Yeah, that's true.
It's been in the center the whole time. Really high accuracy, I bet, from both players, and pawn to e3 on the board.
That's such an instructive moment by Maxime to play this move, to make sure that you use this opportunity to open up your opponent's king for that counterplay. Also, he can think about getting that rook from a8 to g8 at the right moment to build more on this attack. But e3 right now, Magnus touching the 1.5-minute mark. And he's got a big decision to make at this point.
That must be uncomfortable also with that black queen just eyeing up everything in the center of the board there.
That's awesome, Kaya.
Yes. I would be very uncomfortable with the white pieces here.
And yeah, Magnus, he's burnt more than half of his remaining time on this one move. He's about to drop down to around 1 minute, and I think he might have to let a black pawn sit on the second rank. This black pawn, of course, is taboo. You cannot capture it, so you've got to let it advance. And how to escape here with a draw? He takes the f7 pawn, and what happens next? Is this black pawn going to continue marching down the board? Look at the interest that's been piqued by this last move in Vachier-Lagrave. Suddenly, head in hands, calculating mood, and pawn to e2, or do you take on f2?
I think if you take on f2, you're just releasing a lot of tension. I think Magnus is hoping for that decision. But if Maxime goes for e2, he's going for more. That is ambitious play. And that's the big decision. What does Maxime want right now? After e2, queen d1 is a huge threat on the board. You want to try to queen that pawn with this tempo. So I think white will be forced to bring the rook to the defense, to the central square of e1. Notice how black's queen is also tied down to defending his own, her own king on h8, controlling that diagonal. But this gets really complex. Moves like queen e5 keep the tension here.
Yeah, queen e5 defends the pawn, keeps this diagonal covered, so no check still. And next move, the black rook is coming, and defending this pawn, to me, this is quite attractive for black. It feels like white maybe is able to make a draw, but white at least has a passive rook. So white is the one fighting for equality.
He's going to go for e2.
You think he is?
It's going to happen, David.
Play for the win. That's what we want to see. Pawn takes pawn here would allow the white queen to recapture, and most likely here we would see a drawn endgame. For example, if black moves the rook, rook b8, rook f8, and this game would likely end in a draw after the queens come off on the next turn. But Vachier-Lagrave can be more ambitious here, and he's got half an eye on the clock. Surely push the pawn, Maxime. Play for the win. Entertain us.
And it just feels like not just playing to the galleries, but also a move that's very objective in the position. You keep that pawn alive, you keep your chances alive. And this is the thing, right? When you're playing against Magnus, you've got to take these gutsy decisions for those opportunities. And I think Magnus right now probably hoping a little bit that Maxime bails out with pawn takes pawn.
So that's what we're looking for now.
Yeah, it's all about that black e-pawn. We're expecting it to move. If it moves down 1 square to e2, 1 square closer to promotion, that means Maxime is all out for the win. If he trades off a set of pawns, most likely this game will fizzle out. But the only downside for Maxime is the black king is so open, so weak. The temptation to get out of the game with a draw must be high. But he plays for the win. He keeps the tension.
But David, this last move, rook to g8, wow. Okay, so you still can't take on e3 because then you just lose the rook or end up getting checkmated. Wow, rook g8. He is ambitious. It's not e2, but he keeps the tension, shows the nerves.
Magnus leans forward, and he's now down under a minute on the clock, about to tick down to 30 seconds.
Because Maxime has played a move that Magnus was not expecting.
Wow.
Magnus was looking at the two moves that we were discussing there, either pawn takes pawn or pawn to e2. But a third option was available, and Magnus, 20 seconds now. Ooh, he plays a good move, I think, just forcing this black pawn to make a decision finally. But it cost him a bulk of his time, and we've seen today what happens when the clocks tick down. Even in the most simple of positions, blunders do occur. So, okay, he's trying to force the black pawn to trade off. Maybe it's still safe enough for Magnus. This last move was key.
Yeah, because now there's just really no way to go e2 anymore. And that's a nice trick because, I think we should show that, David. You can go e2, setting up a trap of your own that if white was to capture on e2, you've got queen d1 check. But the reason the eval bar stays level is that white has got a perpetual with queen f6, queen f8 at the very end. So it's really not possible for black to get ambitious anymore with that pawn push. And I think Maxime has taken a decision. The other one of simplifying with capturing on f2.
Yeah, and most likely now this game should fizzle out towards a draw. Still some imbalance because white has a 2 versus 1 advantage on the king side, whereas black has a passed pawn on the c-file. But now we see queens forced off the board, rook f8, forces queen trade due to this pin, and who is going to profit from this endgame? It feels very, very level here, and we are expecting 2 endgame greats like these two to get a draw eventually.
But what a first game, though. It seems that this will be an intense battle between 2 fantastic players here in the winners' final. This is only game 1 out of 4 rapid games in this matchup to decide who is the winner in the winners' final and goes straight through to the grand final to be played on Friday. Is there any chance for a win here for any player, or is this just going to be a draw?
It is an endgame, it is Magnus.
Yeah, but it's also Maxime.
It's also Maxime, and especially in endgames where Maxime can calculate, or he can, where it's kind of very mathematical, where it's forcing and it's kind of very kind of clear objective evaluation, he knows exactly what to do. If it's more maneuvering kind of type of positions, slower type of positions, maybe that favors Magnus. But this one is just a dead draw with rooks on the board, level number of pawns. Should be a draw. I say it quietly because it's Magnus. It should.
But do you see in Maxime's play, and this is just a general question then about Maxime's play, but do you see in his style that he is a mathematician?
Definitely. I mean, I've been playing him since I was 9 years old, and I just cannot survive these positions where it's pure calculation. There's an A point, there's a kind of B point, C point, and he can just work his way there. It's so hard to keep up with him, to keep up with that level of accuracy that he has, and he's so quick about it as well. That's why he's so good at speed chess. He sees things instantly. But if you get him in a maybe kind of more theoretical position where it's less straightforward, then sometimes you stand a chance. But Magnus is keeping this game going. Magnus is the only one who can hope for a win here, but not easy.
Not easy, and that's a really nice way to keep the balance, the one that Maxime has chosen, because white really could not have picked up the d4 pawn with either the rook or the king. If the king would have snapped it up, then the black rook just jumps back to the spot where it came from, gives the check, and let's just show that, wins the g4 pawn. On the other hand, if the rook would have captured the d4 pawn, then you lose the a3 pawn, and that's basically a draw for. So Maxime finding a really good resource to keep the balance.
And he's put his rook behind the pass pawn, very logical, maybe trying to push this pawn later, but Magnus keeps the tension, and will we see a dance between the rooks? The black rook now going after this weak white pawn, and next going after this weak white pawn. Feels like this game should still be a draw, but wow, Magnus, is he going for the black h pawn?
He is.
He's really gambling now, Magnus Carlsen. He's allowing the two black pass pawns on the queen side to live because he wants his connected pass pawns on the other flank, and suddenly this is not an obvious draw anymore.
And seconds on the clock for both players now.
This is getting into spicy territory.
Oh, well,
What a
Maxime
move.
gives up his rook. If the white king takes the black rook now, black's pawn would have made a new queen. Suddenly Magnus has got to be really careful to save this.
That maybe he just goes around with checks, and that's if he wants a bailout, he can just start checking the king. Maxime can come back with the king, controlling the d8 square. So Magnus doesn't have that, still can't take the rook. Magnus is playing for more.
Magnus wants more. Look at this. He's gobbled up the remaining black pawn and he's gone around. The G and H pawns are connected. White's rook is really passive though. This should still be a draw, but not easy anymore. Maxime has to show accuracy.
I think Maxime has shown accuracy so far, but he needs to keep it up. Every move, it does count a lot. The rook comes back. If the king moves towards the D pawn, black's rook will start targeting white's pawns. He keeps the pressure on, and it's all about the fact that white can't free up his own rook for activity. And I think he's done it. I think he's saved this one.
Are we in grinding mode now?
We're in grinding mode, but the problem is there aren't too many plans remaining. You cannot maneuver around forever here if you're Magnus Carlsen. You have to make a decision. If you go for black's pawn, you lose your other pawns, the white pawns, vulnerable, and I think we will see the draw. There we go.
Oh, what a game. Long one, but it ends with a draw the first game in the winners final. Maxime Vachier-Lagrave had the black pieces and then this one, and did pose some problems for Magnus Carlsen, but it is a draw and he will have the white pieces in the next one. But some ups and downs there, David. Can you take us through some highlights?
Some real in the last year or two, especially in speed chess, while mixing and matching his openings, he's keeping his opponents guessing. He's not a sitting target anymore, especially with the black pieces, and his results reflect that. And okay, a Sicilian, and will we see a Sicilian Najdorf? Magnus, meanwhile, snacking. Wow.
On the board, David.
And this is Maxime Vachier-Lagrave's speciality when Maxime has black, or at least it used to be. Magnus using his opponent's weapon against him.
Oh.
Psychology.
There's so much dynamics when you do that, because one would think that your opponent's strength, you don't want to go into that, but it can also play in your favor by disbalancing your opponent. It's something that Maxime might not have expected, although we've seen Magnus go for the Najdorf. So it's going to be interesting. I'm still thinking about the near-perfect game that we just had in game one. A 99.8, a 99.5% accuracy, perfect chess, and when you have perfect chess, it's a draw. Guy, you said Magnus has to solve the puzzle. It's not going to be an easy one.
Yeah. When Maxime plays 99.8, I mean, that's as close to perfect as you get, right? I start wondering what one move wasn't the accurate one.
Yeah. I think we'll have to do a deep study into that one move that both players played that were inaccurate or naughty. But yeah, even the chess goddess Kaiser, I don't think she could play 99% accuracy like those two did in the last game. So Sicilian is this an imbalance? To be accurate in this game, I will say, than the previous one, because it is one of those wild positions that will rumble on.
Yeah, Magnus has to solve MVL is our feature chat. He's going to be stuck on this puzzle for a while. And this last move by Maxime, F3, also hints at this move I was just about to say. You want to start advancing on the king side with your pawns, G4. Once again, the Frenchman with 3 names, he makes his intentions clear. He is going for those messy, chaotic positions. I think we are going to see the opposite side castling.
I think it's very likely now. Maxime has basically declared that the white king is not castling on the king side. Yeah, it never will now that he's thrown pawns forward on that flank. So the white king is going left, it's going to the queen side, and Magnus can start preparing an attack on that flank. But how to deal with these pawns flying forward? It's slightly surprising to me that Magnus would choose the Najdorf, basically playing on the opponent's home territory, and then pause this early. It's still relatively well-known waters. Okay, he brings his knight forward, clearing a square for the other black knight to use potentially. Maxime advances.
The thing is, right, Maxime plays this with black, which means that he knows this with white also really well. Because, of course, when you're preparing at that level, the kind of opening preparation that these players have, Maxime knows the ins and outs of knight off. So where does Magnus plan to get his advantage here?
Yeah, to me it's surprising. When I prepare for my opponents, when I study my opponents, I look in the database, I look at all of their games, I build an opening tree, and I see, okay, here is their favorite opening, here is the opening they score strongest in, and then I avoid it at all costs. But Magnus, he's pretty much done the opposite. For example, if I know my opponent plays the French defense themselves as black, I will never play it as black against them, because I know that they're familiar with all the little details, the nuances. Yeah, Magnus going against conventional chess wisdom.
Yeah. When you're playing against Maxime, don't play the French unless you're Magnus Carlsen.
Is that psychological though? Because that would be the normal strategy. MVL knows that most players won't play that opening against him, and then Magnus does, just, you know, showing him, I don't care, I will beat you in that opening as well.
True. It's the mind games. It's the kind of fight for psychological dominance. If you can beat your opponent at what they know best, then you really break their spirit.
Yeah.
And Magnus,
Yeah, so imagine if Magnus wins this game.
yeah, this would be huge.
But that's far off right now. And I think it's Maxime with the last two moves that he's indicated that he's going to go for the king. And that's pun intended. Black's king and the king of chess here as well. Knight d7 falls back with the knight. And I think it's time for white to step up with the queen. Get that king to safety. And then look at Harry the h-pawn advancing down the board to assist Gary there.
Yeah, white has a ready-made attack. You called it, Tanya. Very logical move now. White's king is ready to jump over to safety. Hiding behind those white knights on the queen side, it's going to be very difficult for black to whip up any type of initiative on that flank. I don't see where the black king really wants to hide either. Do you hide behind, could you kind of castle into it, as we say? Hide behind your pawns on the king side, but white has a ready-made attack there. Oof, I've always been terrified of these types of positions my entire career, just because they are so kind of irrational. It's so hard to get a grip. Every move is just kind of living life on the edge for both. But here, the stakes are higher for black.
Yeah, every move is a high responsibility move in this kind of a position and this kind of an opening. And Magnus really burning the clock. So a little bit more unfamiliar for Magnus than it is for Maxime. It's sort of been his bread and butter his whole life, the night off for Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. And this is what Magnus has up his sleeve. So, David, you said Black's king has got no safe ground. And because there hasn't been a shot castle, he strikes in that flank right now, asking Maxime what he wants to intend. You would love to go h4, but let's point out that there's a pin along that diagonal, so it really doesn't help. After a move like h4, black can actually just capture on g5 because you can't recapture with the pawn.
Yeah, and Magnus's idea is to force the opponent to capture with a piece, and here he will happily offer a trade. And actually, long term here, black is doing pretty well because this pawn is isolated. So if it ever gets to the endgame, which is far from a guarantee, then black will have weaknesses to stare at. And actually, his idea is very opportunistic because it does also rely on the trick that pawn is met by a queen check. Suddenly, just before the white king kind of scoots over to safety on the queen side, it gets checked. And of course, you can't castle when you're in check, so you have to block or move the king. And for example, if you block with your bishop, suddenly the black queen just retreats, takes this pawn, and same issue for white. This is long-term a huge weakness in any endgame, especially if the queens disappear. And of course, black has conveniently offered that trade of queens. Note how the knights defend each other as well, so white's bishop can never really take this knight. Magnus, yeah, he's really kind of showing that he's flexible in these types of positions. I don't know if this is opening preparation. He spent a bit of time, but h6 is very rare to be able to play this as black, and he's found the correct moment and for the first time forced Maxime to think.
Yeah, a very concrete play. Maxime has slowed down. Now that we've discussed these ideas, you don't want to take on h6 because of the check. You don't want to go h4 because the pin doesn't work out in your favor. I think Maxime has to think about long castle. Get your king to safety. And I think he's played the move. And David, now the point is you want to play bishop to e7. Wow, Magnus does it. I thought this just loses the d6 pawn.
Yeah, he's willing to sacrifice a pawn just to get into the endgame here, Magnus Carlsen. Bishop takes bishop now does allow the d6 pawn to drop. It's only defended once, it's attacked twice, and I think we're headed in this direction. We'll see the queen's traded off. Black will most likely step the king forward, forcing the white rook back, and then he's going to try and stack up his rooks against this weakness. It's a whole pawn here. I'm skeptical. I think objectively white's doing pretty well. The evaluation bar's slightly in white's favor, but Magnus, we all know his expertise in the endgame. He's just playing for his type of position, having been maybe out-prepared in the opening.
But surely when you're down a pawn in this position, you're just trying to hold this one.
Yeah, it is Magnus. You never know. First he gets an equal endgame. Well, first he starts with the worst endgame, then an equal endgame, then he wins. That's how he rolls.
Yeah, he's got this incredible ability to not only convert winning positions flawlessly, but somehow win worse positions as well. So Magnus right now, this is our live board, and Maxime Vachier-Lagrave still thinking if he wants to go into that endgame and challenge Magnus, where Magnus really does thrive. But I'm expecting queen takes pawn right now, because if not that, what else?
Yeah, Maxime has kind of burnt his bridges. He's not going to get an attack now, a direct attack at least against the black king. So why not grab material? You have this slightly worse pawn structure for white on the king's side, so you might as well suffer for something. Often that's just how top-level chess works these days. Someone gives a little bit of material, whether it's a pawn, whether it's a piece, and then they have this long-term compensation in return. And it will be a theme of the game, white's extra pawn versus black's kind of control on the king side. And Vachier-Lagrave, he's clearly reluctant. He knows it's a Magnus type of position. I think maybe he's just scared of the opponent here, understandably. But eventually he will surely go and grab this pawn. Who can resist? Free material?
Maxime can.
Maxime.
Maxime can. And I really like this move. David, I was actually thinking about this because you want to come in with a tempo, and the b7 pawn is so much more important than the d6 pawn, which is a lifelong weakness in the position. Why is that? Because the d6 pawn, Kaya, will always be under fire. It's not going anywhere. The queen and the rook are... This is tricky because Maxime is inviting Magnus to actually jump in with the knight to defend that b7 pawn, but that's the whole point of this. Now when you grab d6, David, the black knights are disconnected, and after this queen trade, suddenly there is pressure on that b6 knight, which is no longer defended by its own friend, the other knight.
Yeah, suddenly white would have wanted to earlier because rook takes knight and white would win material. Instead, you have to play really ugly moves like retreating to the back rank. Suddenly, white is a pawn up, and this knight looks really beautiful, actually, putting pressure here. Black's pieces just discombobulated, as Simon would say, and just unable to really fight back. And as you mentioned, knight takes pawn, a huge threat. You actually want to win this pawn and then the d6 pawn in that order only. So how does Magnus first protect this one safely?
I mean, rook b8 is a very ugly move. You never want to make a move like that. Devalbar says it's possible, but not an absolute disaster.
Yeah, I think this is last resort for Magnus. If he finds nothing better, he'll defend his pawn with his rook, but nobody likes to make their pieces passive. You said ugly, and that's the definition of ugly. Rook to b8 on a really passive square. A whole knight, 3 points, is tying down a rook and pawn worth 5-6 points together. And okay, we get engine suggestions just below the board, and we see some moves. King to c8 there, it says that means castle's queenside. Being the best, actually by quite a distance. Black's best move here is to castle into the firing line, not fearing any attack, and just saying, okay, we can go for an endgame. And then the black king is actually pretty decently placed, defending the pawn on b7. Black's second best move is your move there. We've both termed that ugly here, Tanya, rook to b8, but everything else gives white a huge advantage.
It's on the board. He goes for it.
I think this is more human. Castling queenside feels a bit risky there. It would have been a really airy side of the board. Lots of holes around. So we can understand Magnus's decision.
And it was only these two moves, right? Whatever you do, you have to defend the b7 pawn. That collapses, the position collapses. So it was between these two moves. And as you said, from a human perspective, long castle just looks extremely scary. So Magnus going for rook to b8. I might be tempted to actually not trade the queens here, because now black's king is just stuck in the center forever.
Yeah, stuck in the center, and this pawn isn't running away anytime soon, so you can snack on it later. Let's see what Maxime Vachier-Lagrave decides to do. Yeah, really tense position here. Magnus is basically just sitting and waiting and saying, please take the pawn, and he does. So we're headed into the endgame now. Black's king is surely going to advance, kicking away that white rook. There we go. And it's all about how weak are White's kingside pawns. He's a pawn up. White is dominant on the queenside. Long term, he's going to win that. But does Black have counterplay, Tanya?
And David, the counterplay that you were pointing out earlier with Black's rooks doubling up on the H line, we see another point of Maxime's move with the knight to A5, that now the queenside rook is actually tied down to defending that B7 pawn. So not that easy to create play against the H2 pawn of White on the king side, which actually frees up Maxime.
Yeah. I mean, I would take White here every day. Usually, I prefer the compensation in terms of kind of long-term strategic trumps, but I don't see how Black kind of, at least speedily, gets any initiative going here. I don't think Magnus is enjoying this position that much.
He's not. And Maxime's played so confidently. He's also up on the clock here. He's up a pawn. Right now, Magnus still has to neutralize White's edge here, has to prove his compensation for that pawn.
And I'm curious, is there any way we can check the accuracy levels up to this point? I have a feeling Magnus, his accuracy levels maybe a bit lower than Maxime's.
Oh, yeah.
I think we need our viewers to tell us. Check on chess.com/events, and yeah, let's check out those accuracy levels, which are just through the roof so far in this match. Magnus does move his knight away.
Right now it says 100.
Ooh. Wow. By both
Maxime.
players.
Yeah. But I'm wondering if this is not updated.
Wow, we'll get an update on that.
Yeah.
I mean, it was close to 100% in that game one, and Maxime has been on fire these last couple of months. But of course, Magnus has just been unstoppable this whole year.
Yeah, Magnus has been in beast mode, boss mode throughout the year so far.
It's the final boss.
Yeah, he is that big boss. In order to beat him, well, in order to win any tournament, you have to get through him first. That's the issue. And knight to f6, a nice move. There's actually a trap in this position. It looks like White can trick Black, but actually would get tricked in the process. One move not to play would be a very tempting bishop takes a6. It looks like you're deflecting away the Black pawn in order to land a devastating knight fork, a knight check, forcing the Black king back, and then feasting on the Black rook. But tricksters get tricked here. Bishop takes pawn would be met by a skewer. The Black rook moves across. You can take as many pawns as you want, but you will lose a piece in the process. So some sneaky tactics here. Magnus has set a trap, which of course Maxime won't fall into, and he does just shift his rook to g1. What's the idea here? Is he going after this pawn?
I think so. And it's so tempting as well, right? Because it forces Black into the defense of that pawn. It's on the board, David. Maxime going for all the weaknesses here. Does Magnus now have to fall back with the knight? Because losing a second pawn just would be disastrous here.
Yeah, it's not pleasant, this choice for Magnus. Either he has to retreat this knight, go back where he came from. This knight was on this square just 2 moves ago. He's lost time, Magnus. Or he has to retreat the other Black knight. And this one doesn't look great either. You've lost some control. You're a pawn up. Feels like it's turning in Maxime's favor. Valuation bar slightly on White's side too.
And his accuracy is 99.3 MVL. Magnus is 98.9. He's down to 98, Magnus.
Slacking.
Yeah, slacking.
Unacceptable.
Yeah. Wow. Just the level these two are on today. It's incredible. Really putting up an amazing fight in the winners final. This is going to be, I mean, obviously it's going to be super hard to just get in a win today. And that means maybe we will have Armageddon.
Yeah, this match very well could go down to the wire, and we've seen Magnus have this fantastic year. He seems absolutely unstoppable, but even for Maxime, one feels like it's been sort of a resurgence for him these last few months, the kind of chess that he's been playing. I mentioned the Tata Steel, as well as in SCC making it to the semi-finals. He's such a speed chess specialist. This is going to be a close battle. It is rightfully the winner's final.
Oh, amazing. Yeah. MVL proving that he belongs here. In the Champions Chess Tour, it is very nice to finally see a match between these two this season. Two players who have grown up together in that golden 1990 generation. With you as well, David. What do you remember of Maxime with him?
I was young. I played him in the World, or was it European Under-10 Championship? And then I actually had a match against him when we were both 9-10 years old. Ooh. I went over to France. I flew over to France. We played an 8-game rapid match.
Wow.
and he beat me.
Oh.
The score was 5.5, 2.5, and I remember even back then he was playing the Sicilian Najdorf, he was playing the Grunfeld every single game. He stuck with those openings for, 25 years, and very successful with them. Onto a calculation type of position, he would see deeper than me, and it's been an uphill struggle for me against him ever since. He's always been one of my kind of kryptonites.
Oh.
But yeah, Magnus as well. I met very young and, of course, pretty decent player too. But yeah, these two have had some great fights throughout the years. It's always been epic. It's always been very, very close. And I think the fact that they're the same generation means that they know each other very well as well. And Maxime knows that Magnus, there's only kind of two scenarios where he struggles. Either you attack him and you catch him cold, and you kind of checkmate Magnus, or you frustrate him. That's why Magnus, I think, walked away from World Championship matches, because he didn't like these long grinds where it's very level, very drawish, margin for error is so small. And I think that's what he's doing now. He's frustrating Magnus. It's like 99% accuracy. It's so close. No blunders. If you avoid blunders against Magnus, you have a chance. And Maxime playing this very, very strong brand of chess right now.
Yeah, these guys are amazing. We agree with you, Andrea. And the bar is slightly up for MVL. What do you think right now in this game? Do you think it's going to be a draw, or do you think we'll have a winner in it? If anyone's playing for a win, it's got to be white here. You're up a pawn. You've done everything right after winning that pawn. You've tied down black's rook to defend a pawn on the queen side. So that's really one piece that right now, at least, Magnus is playing without. You've managed to take out your own pieces. You're also trading black's most active bishop in the position, trying to take control. Fight for that d5 square, and Maxime has managed to offer a trade with his own light squared bishop. So I really like what Maxime's done. Again, feels like a game for two results. I think most likely will end in a draw, but Magnus will have to prove that.
Yeah, Magnus will have to prove it, and we can see in his body language he's not enjoying the task. He's just got to sit still right now, black, and kind of wait for Maxime to come up with a plan. Does Maxime go direct? Does he kind of continue slow playing it? Maybe start pushing some pawns on the queen side? Yeah, Maxime's at least burning some time, so Magnus will be optimistic about that. It's not easy. It's not 100% straightforward to find a productive plan for white.
It's really not, and you've got to sort of be patient here. You know, you were pointing out this tactics with the bishop takes pawn, vacating that c6 square. Now with black's rook that has jumped forward, after bishop takes pawn, black actually can't recapture the bishop on a6 because now knight c6 will win the game. But what Magnus is relying on instead of recapturing on a6 is actually just sliding with the rook on a8, lining it up with the bishop and the knight. So this tactical blow still doesn't work, but it's always in the air.
Yeah, I think that's the main reason Maxime is hesitating from trading bishops. He wants to, at some point, land this trick. He's always been so efficient since a young age at finding these tactics, and he does play the move b3. So if Magnus is kind of careless and allows this trap, it could eventually be winning for white. Doesn't work quite yet, but I love his last move as well. Getting ready to improve his king slightly, then he'll improve his pawn slightly, put every piece, every pawn on perfect squares, and then go for the action. Meanwhile, how does Magnus break out? This tension on the queen side that you pointed out, Tanya, is so frustrating. You can never ever push your pawn because knight c6 will always be a nasty, nasty fork. So you're just tied down forever. And Magnus, he's the one to pause this time because no obvious moves for him. If he takes this bishop off the board, white will happily recapture with the knight. And this white knight might even come round to a nice outpost on d5. No tempting options here for black. You just have to continue sitting past.
It's sort of like a slow waiting game, and Magnus doesn't wait any longer. He does trade off the bishop, and now the plan that you're seeing, it really wants to be played, right? You reroute your knight, and you try to get to that d5 square, which is such a central point in any Sicilians that we see. Knight e3, knight d5, the c pawn starts moving up the board, the king joins the party, and the whole aim, the idea is that you have to be slow and steady, but create a passer on the queen side for winning chances.
And Magnus is playing a game of distraction here. He's trying to remind white that he has a weakness. Maxime's h-pawn is all alone and isolated right now. Is he threatening to take it? That's the question. And Maxime, does he have to go passive? Of course, the answer is no. If you ask any top player, do you want to put a piece on a passive square to defend a mere pawn? But sometimes you have to. And there we go. Maxime decides he has to keep the material advantage. The rest of the board not quite in his favor yet.
Yeah, it's all about playing it slow and taking it slow, right? You want to reroute your pieces, but first just don't lose out on that material advantage that you have. Black can step up to the h3 square, also targeting the f3 pawn, but then white will simply slide up with the rook and keep everything defended. The plan is clear. After you've saved all your pawns, you can fall back with the knight, land on d4, and eventually, because David, let's not forget, even black's rooks are stuck on the king side, right? You've got your army that wants to target the weakness, but that means that the queen side play is free for white. King comes in, pawns start rolling, and that's when we'll find out whether this advantage is going to be enough or not.
Advantage, but it's quite kind of murky, but it could become something much more tangible if white does indeed eventually land a knight on d5. I wouldn't envy Magnus right now. As you say, Tanya, just rook here. It looks like the only active possibility, but easily shut down. White covers all of the weaknesses, and then it's one-way traffic other flank. Magnus needs to weave that endgame magic. How's he going to achieve this? 4 minutes against 5 minutes. Accuracy level is still pretty high, I assume, but that could well turn in the next few moves.
Do you think he'll save it?
I'm going to back Maxime here. I think Maxime, big favorite actually to win this game. How about you, Tanya?
He's going to push. Maxime. I don't think anyone in the world I would bet against Maxime in this position, but I think Magnus with his endgame touch. Wow, it's going to be a big fight. And look at that. Magnus goes for very direct play on the queen side, but this might give Maxime more targets there with the pawns moving forward. Well, knight anyway wanted to land on that e3 square. Knight e3, what Magnus wants to do is bring his own knight from d7 to b6 to control the d5 square.
And Kaya, you need to break the tie. What is your prediction?
I'm gonna bet on a win for Maxime. He is, the expert in the opening that Magnus chose. And I think that was a mind game by Magnus Carlsen, because he thought, well, a draw is the most likely. If I win it, that's going to be huge disappointment for MVL, so I'm going to do the Najdorf. But I think MVL will be cold as ice and win it.
I actually think if Magnus would win with a Najdorf, psychologically, that's match over.
Yeah.
But the position that we have on the board, it's not going to happen.
We're so influenced by white side. I think we would all say he's going to win this one, pawn up, endgame. But Maxime, he's capable.
If anyone is, it is Maxime. I mean, he's just playing such brilliant chess, such accurate chess, taking his chances when they come on the board, whether it's tactical play, whether it's playing slow and steady, positional, strategic, rerouting, as we're seeing right now, or the way he played against Shakhriyar Mamedyarov, winning that match, or how he took down Alireza Firouzja. Just so versatile and playing every position to perfection.
Ooh, pawn to a4, that's not a move you normally want to play. For example, after pawn takes pawn, white will have to break up his own pawn structure. But this is typical Maxime. He's very direct if he can be, and I'm skeptical. Suddenly the black rook switches focus, and look at the white a pawn, isolated. Look at the white c pawn, also isolated. Suddenly Maxime, he's kind of turned his advantage, which was very long term, into something dynamic, and it's got to work now for white. Otherwise, your extra pawn might fall, and with it, all of your advantage.
Yeah, a4 is not a move that you play lightly. It's such a committal move. You've given black a clear target, not only the open c line, but that pawn on a4. Black's knight can also jump to c4 and trade off white's active knights there, where one rook will keep pieces tied down on the king side, defending h2, and the other rook will start targeting the other weakness on a4. Yeah, I'm surprised with that decision by Maxime. Just as you were saying that, he's got this long-term play, long-term advantage, slow, steady, accurate chess, and a4 on the board.
Yeah, that's the one thing that's held Max, again, since he's been young. He sometimes rushes in positions where he can just take it easy, take it slow. Here you can just kind of push your pawn one square forward just to stop black advancing if you want, or you can start bringing the white king forward. Only later, when you're 100% ready, then you push the pawn to a4. I think Magnus, if he were in grind mode in this type of endgame, he would take it easy, take it slow, and only go for it at the right moment. To play a4, weakening your pawns here, it's a really high responsibility, and you have to hope it pays off. He plays the move king to b2, defending his knight right now, but suddenly the black pieces will come into the game. Suddenly some targets maybe on the third rank, some loose pawns, loose pieces here. I imagine the other black rook kind of coming around, going over to help its fellow over here. And that's what Magnus is doing. He's targeting the white king first. Once the white king moves, it has to. Don't allow a discover check. There we go. King to a2, slide across. The other rook surely coming around. No, Magnus just trying to repeat. Magnus is silently offering a draw here. If the white king goes back, he'll kind of dance around with his rook as well. We can see a dance between the rook and kings.
Yeah, this is a big moment, which is just going to give us a peek into the minds of the players. And Maxime declines the repetition, so he wants more. He defends the knight with the rook.
Okay, great to see positivity there. Great to see ambition from Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, but he still has holes in his position. These weaknesses that Magnus is now trying to target. It's suddenly a 3-result game. Earlier, I would have described it as only a possible win for white or a draw. Magnus, though, he's probing. If one of these white weaknesses... 2 minutes each now as well.
Very tense position, and black has a direct threat of attacking the pawn. For white, in these kind of positions, it's all about whether you want to push that a4 pawn and fix it on a5. It gives you this target on that black pawn next to it for a long time, but it needs to be timed well. Rook h3 does attack f3, and I think the reason that Maxime isn't rushing with the natural rook defense one step on that f2 square is because he's considering the move a5 here.
Played, Tanya.
On the board.
Good spot there. Not going passive, not purely reacting to the opponent's threat, trying to create your own threats. And again, that's kind of indicative of Maxime's style. He's always on the front foot. He doesn't want to be the one just kind of answering the opponent's moves every time. He wants to dictate the pace of the game. Now, where does the black go? Black knight go? Back or forward?
Not backwards.
Not back.
That looks terrifying, right? Because if you go back, you're just inviting white's knight to come forward with a check, and you don't want to lose control of that square.
Yeah, so the black knight now maybe jumping in. This is where we're different, Tanya. My first reaction is go back. I agree. It didn't look pleasant, but Magnus does indeed follow your advice. The black knight clearly on a better square, better circuit than it would have been if it had retreated. Now, black has to be careful where he puts the king. I was going to say, again, my first instinct, go back to safety, but Magnus is brave with his king. That's why he's a superior endgame player to most in the world. He's very taking these risks because his king might well prove an active piece later. Suddenly, white has to defend this a pawn. How, though? How do you keep it intact? Black trying to equalize the material here.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a way, and it's really not that clear. A knight c4 just hits that pawn, and you don't want to make a move. Well, I don't even know. Rook b3, that's kind of nice, because what you really want is activity. And there are some ideas of the rook not only giving a check on b6 once the knight moves from c4, but also the rook could land on b7 with threats along the 7th rank. And it might be headed there. Is rook b7 a possibility right now?
I think it's definitely a possibility. I think that would be the most consistent move, especially following up what Maxime has done. But he slides back. He's lost a move here. He pins the black knight, but he could have done this last move. I think he could have reached the same position just with one extra move here, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. Sign of uncertainty for the first time in this game.
Yeah, and especially now because black can actually take the a5 pawn with the rook with a check.
Yeah, what could be more logical? What could be more tempting? Rook takes the king could retreat, could go forward. If it's Magnus, he would go forward, so let's assume it does. And the black knight now would be under pressure. Instead, Magnus delays that decision. He postpones taking on a5 because he actually might want to go for checkmate. The black rook wants to slide to b8, cutting off the white king from using the b file, and then he wants to take a5, and Maxime goes on the other flank, pawn to f4.
Oh my gosh, and it's a mistake. Is Magnus going to go for a win now against the white king?
This looks so scary. What happens if Magnus... Two black rooks cutting off the white king. Here, I guess Maxime is relying on the fact he can block the b file with his own rook. Now, rook takes pawn. At least there's one hiding spot. But Magnus is turning things in his favor. Wow, never write him off the world number one. Threatening checkmate on the board. Oh, sorry, my arrows. Rook takes pawn. Would be a huge threat, but defended by Maxime, and the game goes on. White living on the edge here.
Wow, so Magnus has managed to pick up that pawn and restore material balance. It's his knight which is threatening the e4 pawn. The rook on a5 really active. You know what? I think now it's Maxime who needs to be on the defense here suddenly.
Definitely. And imagine Maxime's mind right now. He was in control the whole game. He was dominating. He was a pawn up. Suddenly it's level material. Suddenly White's pawns are all really loose. White's B pawn, not happily standing there and inviting the Black King, the Black Knight forward. This is bizarre.
And Magnus there reacted. He was really surprised by Maxime's decision.
Yeah, the Black Rook is attacked, but it can just move to any safe square. And Black is about to grab a pawn, win a pawn.
Whoa. Is it the Magnus touch?
Might well be. He's relying on a trick. He wants to play knight to c7 check, pick up Black's a pawn, but look how active Black's knight is in the center. Black's rook clearly more active than the white rook. Black's king more centralized than the white king. All of these small factors will add up. If it becomes a race, only Magnus can win. Still maybe within the drawing rounds, but Maxime's got to be really careful. Look at Magnus harmonizing in the center, coordinating his pieces, moving in for the kill.
Yeah, you just compare all the pieces on the board. That rook, knight, and king, just 5 moves ago, it was a completely different scenario. Now they're all into Maxime's camp, and the f-pawn is about to join the party.
Yeah, Black's f-pawn, watch it march forward, f for forward. Whereas the white b-pawn can advance, but it might just get off if it walks too far up the board. White's knight, meanwhile, is terrible. You've got to say that white knight is just too far offside. Also, look at the clock.
Oof.
Ooh, he allows a check. He also allows the black pawn to come forward with gain of tempo in some positions. Maxime, I think the clock is getting to him. The nerves, the turnaround. Black gives a check. We see just below the board as well some move suggestions. Black can push pawns with, with a very strong position with winning chances, but he gets greedy here, grabs Magnus.
And now can he just actually trade everything off and go for a king and queen endgame there? Once pawns are promoted.
Yeah, I think he could have done.
What happened to the bar here?
Yeah, it's gone back to the middle. The problem is Black's knight is pinned. It's caught in the crossfire. White's rook lining up against the Black Knight, Black King, and the only way to keep it intact, the only way to defend it, is to give a pawn back.
Yeah, you have to push the f-pawn, because I think if you defend knight with the rook, then White can actually trade everything off and start marching the board with the b-pawn.
Wow, Tanya, you're right. Black has to push his f-pawn, play pawn to f5, otherwise White is winning.
Exactly.
We'd see a turnaround where White's b-pawn, he plays it, White's b-pawn would have... Okay, can Maxime hold the draw? Suddenly it's White with the narrow path. You have to move your rook, you have to take Black's pawn. Natural, but White's king is in huge trouble on the edge.
Yeah, that feels like a bit of a kill zone. You have to watch out for any checkmating ideas, and we saw Magnus do that against Jan yesterday.
Watch out, checkmate in 1 is threatened. Black's rook threatens to jump the whole way over the board across to a3. Check that white king, trap that white king.
Less than 10 seconds for him, yeah.
He's done the right thing, he's running.
You know what's going to happen, David? White's going to sacrifice the knight for the pawn, and we're going to have a rook and knight versus rook.
Oh, and another 50 moves of fun. Just for anyone wondering about endgame theory, rook and knight versus rook is a draw, but you have to defend accurately for a long, long time. And I think we will head in that direction. White will sacrifice the knight for Black's pawn. Black's pawn is the only potential winner because it's a future queen. Every pawn's a future queen, potentially. But, okay, we're still going around. White's king is still cut off on the back rank.
We're still going around, and Magnus isn't going to make it that easy. If Maxime is able to give up the knight for the pawn, that will end in a draw. Maxime will be up for that task, but Magnus isn't going to let that happen so easily. He's going to try and defend that pawn for as long as he can.
Slightly surprised Magnus didn't try and trap that white king on the back rank. Now, offering a trade of rooks. If Magnus trades off the rooks now, White's knight should...
9 seconds for Maxime as well. He has to be precise in this one.
Yeah, I think the pawn is just too far away from promotion. The problem is, for Black, the only way to win is to bully White's knight away. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be quick either. What's Maxime doing with his king? He's going the long way around. Black's king in the center, kind of acting as a blockader. Whoa, knight takes knight. The black pawn runs. Similar pattern to that beautiful idea we saw with Nepo. But look at this, the black pawn will promote. But there will be a knight fork at the end. Black can make a new queen, but White will deliver check. Knight to e3 check, a fork. He makes a rook. Chess humor there. And a draw.
Very, humoristic then, I guess. Ending to that game. It ends with a draw. Another one, you guys. They are still tied after 2 games. Maxime, Vachier-Lagrave defending there in the end. And with the white pieces, he secures the draw against Magnus Carlsen, tied after 2 games. 2 more rapid games to go to decide this winner's final. Okay, what happened here? So Magnus fighting here to get to defend heroically, I guess, then?
Yeah, especially at the end. Let's just do a quick slow motion replay of those final few moves. It happened.
These two. And here we have Magnus again with the white pieces. What's happening here?
Oh, another Sicilian defense, and this time Maxime Vachier-Lagrave is heading towards the Najdorf.
Okay, his speciality.
Of course, favorite of Kasparov, of Fischer, some legendary world champions, and okay, ooh, the players repeated the moves there just for a moment. There is a famous Najdorf draw of White's bishop dropping back, getting hit, but of course, these players want to fight, and we're back towards the main line. Slightly different pawn structure, Tanya, to the other Najdorf, but it's going to be equally fighting.
Yeah, this is going to be quite a fiery game. Maxime Vachier-Lagrave decided not to play the knight off in the first game, went for the Sveshnikov with 2 knight c6. Then Magnus is the one who goes for the knight off, and Maxime says, you can't do that against me. I'm the knight off expert here. So it is a day of the open Sicilian, and I'm loving it already. I think we are going to have opposite side castling in this one. It will become a race to the other's king. Queen d2 does hit, while Maxime will put the bishop on b7, develop with the knight forward to d7. The queen lands on c7. We're going to see some thematic moves here.
Yeah, I think we'll learn a lot from this game in terms of where to put your pieces for both sides in this type of structure. Black is super flexible, and I would argue that Black is much more flexible in this kind of branch of the Najdorf than Magnus was in the previous game, where we saw him fix the center very early on. We will likely see opposite side castling, as Tanya mentions, but Magnus, he's hesitating. It does look like Black has a ready-made attack against the white king, throwing pawns forward. If you kind of prematurely commit your king to that flank, maybe he'll start taking a leaf out of Maxime's book by throwing pawns forward himself first. And are you surprised, Tanya? Because if Magnus plays 1e4, he's hoping for the Sicilian Najdorf, surely.
Yeah, he is, but Maxime's not one that's afraid. This is an opening that Maxime has played all his life against the very best players in the world. So it doesn't matter who he's playing, how well they're prepared. Maxime really knows all the ins and outs of this opening. So it's going to be quite an interesting middle game battle. What does Magnus have in mind against Maxime's Najdorf? For now, Maxime starts on the king side. The g pawn has been stalled. You really don't want to pick up the b4 pawn as white right now, opening up, not only giving black a b file to fight on, but also tactics with the d pawn moving forward. And watch out for that bishop on f8 suddenly becoming really active, and the d pawn and the knight putting pressure on the central e4 pawn.
Yeah, definitely don't get greedy here. You can actually take this pawn in 2 different ways. You can also advance your knight to hit the black queen, but this would also be inadvisable because the white knights now are just terrible on these 2 squares, a4 and b4. And similar ideas to yours there, Tanya. Either the black rook can use the b file, or maybe black can even strike out in the center. This bishop looks extremely strong. The tactics will favor black, while the white king is so exposed in the middle of the board. And of course, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave being an expert, he won't play a move like pawn to h6. Quite slow move there, unless he's hoping for white to take the bait. This pawn is poisoned, and I'm expecting Magnus to kind of be consistent. He's lifted his queen up, he's got ready to castle, he's pushed pawns on the king side, so castle queen side makes a lot of sense here right now. And the only thing that confuses me in this type of position, or at least the main thing, a lot of things confuse me here, but the main thing is this knight. Is it a strength or is it a weakness? It's kind of on an outpost because it can't be hit by a pawn, but it could also get kind of trapped on the edge of the board if you're not careful, not influencing the center.
The one thing good about that knight, David, is that it stops the pawn avalanche on the queen side. The a5, a4 is not going to happen anytime soon. So it kind of delays the counterplay that black has against the potentially castle king on the queen side. A knight to a4, it can become a target, but while Maxime will set that up, Magnus needs to find his play either in the center or the king side based on where Maxime decides to place his king. So it often becomes a race and a question of momentum. Who gets to each other's king first?
Yeah, and okay, I'm going to ask you about the clock this time. Magnus, he's only spent a couple of minutes, but it is slightly worrying that he's thinking, again, he's fighting on his opponent's home territory. This time Vachier-Lagrave with the black pieces. This is his bread and butter. And again, he's thinking, Magnus, he could have predicted this type of position. How surprising is this?
That's the thing, right? In these kind of Najdorfs,
even if you're slightly unsure about the move order, it's a good idea to slow down because every move, once again, is a high responsibility move in an opening like Knight Off. You could end up facing big troubles if you're inaccurate. Magnus decides to go for long castle immediately, and now for Maxime, does he continue with development, improving the bishop? He starts with improving his knight, brings it on to e5.
The speed is impressive here from Vachier-Lagrave. He's prepared. He's for sure studied this position before. This has been cooked up in his home laboratory.
He's been playing this for about 500 years now.
Yeah. If there's something about the knight off, if you have any questions, ask Maxime. He will reveal everything.
I think for anyone watching, if they want to play the knight off, if that's an opening that they're looking at, Maxime's the guy. You've got to watch his masterpieces, just the way he develops the pieces, how he often sacrifices material for the initiative in these kind of openings. And I think Maxime and Anish, these are the two players who we've seen play the knight off just to perfection.
Yeah, and Jan Nepomniachtchi, who used to play it kind of solely the knight off, now he's branched out. He's mostly plays the Petrov defense. But yes, this branch of the Sicilian, named after Argentinian Grandmaster Miguel Najdorf, it's combative, it's a favorite of several world champions, and it's not a coincidence. Black has such a flexible position. You keep all the pieces on the board, is so dynamic, and that's all you need when you want to outplay your opponents.
Did you ever delve into the knight off yourself with Black?
Yes, but not very successfully. I quickly gave up that experiment, Tanya. How about yourself?
I do love playing the Sicilian, but more into the Sveshnikov territory. For me, knight off is just so much theory and so much memorization of moves. And again, you have to be so accurate and understand these tactical dynamics. And people think that the knight off is extremely aggressive, but it's got a really strong strategic positional foundation as well.
That's right. Black does have two pawns in the center. This is something we've discussed in previous days. Because Black has a pawn on the e-file and d-file, you're the one who's breaking out, and you're the one with a very healthy pawn structure. Actually, endgames often favor Black due to that factor. So yeah, solid foundation, but the memory work. I think that's
that's the hard part.
We heard it from Magnus. Work ethic. It's a big issue for a lot of chess players, and if you have to memorize 100 lines, kind of 200 lines, then it becomes less appealing these openings.
Yeah, memory is definitely not my big forte. So no knight off for me, but it means as a commentator, we really enjoy these openings. And so much has happened already. Look at Maxime using those two pawns on the queen side. He's clamped down on the three pawns that Magnus has. The b4 pawn looks really strong, but the disadvantage of that, every pawn move has its own set of consequences. You give some squares to white's pieces. The light squares around it, the a4 and the c4 square. I think for Black, David, again, it will be around the thematic central break of trying to get a successful d5 in.
Yeah, and the question is, when, Tanya? If not now, maybe now? What happens if Black does break in the center? We're talking about these two central pawns for Black. These pawns giving a lot of cover for the Black king, first of all, but also a lot of flexibility to break out. And it goes against...
he does it!
Yeah, it goes against what we're taught, opening the position when your opponent's king is slightly safer, when your king is sitting in the middle uncastled. But he does it. I think he's ready, because pawn takes pawn here would be met by a knight jump, and these two Black knights just control everything. Threatening to take maybe, threatening to jump into a nice hole in the opponent's camp. I think Magnus here has to be really careful how he treads. He does attack this Black knight, very logical. And if the Black knight moves, maybe he's aiming to block up the center. And this position would get really, really sharp in the next few moves. This Black knight, of course, lacking squares, you can trade off a set of pieces, but the knight now forced to some ugly retreats. Some ugly posts here.
It's so complicated, this position already, and so much tension in the center that we have on the live board. Magnus with his last move threatening the knight. I like your idea of retreating to a square where you actually attack that bishop on f4. And Black's own bishop on d7, very often it can actually move to b5, offering a trade, even at the cost of the pawn. It has to be timed really well, obviously not right now, but to open up the A line. So there are these ideas that exist. What on earth just happened?
Vachier-Lagrave has sacrificed a piece out of the blue, totally unexpected. Let's do a quick action replay. His knight was attacked. More positional players, more conservative players would have retreated their knight, but he jumps in, gives up a whole piece, and he lands another knight in the center of the board. It's a piece for 2 pawn sacrifice. He's only sacrificed 1 point, but this knight is going to jump into some nice squares. What do you think, Tanya?
That's the thing, right, David? Maxime knows all these tricks and tips that exist in the night of these tactical ideas of giving up a piece. It's such a committal decision, especially when you're playing against the world's best player.
Just looking for some tempting moves. I really want to bring my bishop out to attack the white queen, but the problem is I would drop the pawn on g7. So maybe he could start by pushing this pawn forward. It looks ugly. Never play f6, then Feingold says. But here suddenly it does have the solid foundation of bringing this bishop out next move. You could hint that you might want to step forward in the center later. Again, time that well. But yeah, fascinating position. I mean, the move I'm most attracted to is knight jumping in, attacking this rook, attacking this pawn. But yeah, he's hesitating for a reason. I think this would be the human approach. We see the bar react. Let's see what Maxime has. A piece sacrifice, and then he thinks, like you say, it's slightly odd.
But I think that's also because he believes in the dynamics of the position. He believes that there is compensation. You can't calculate these lines to the very end. It's not a concrete line. It's just playing for the dynamic balance, which is piece activity, which is the dark squared bishop jumping onto c5 at the right time, hitting the white queen, which is all these squares around white king. So sort of like a long-term compensation. Maxime is not going to regain the material anytime soon. David, he goes with a similar idea to f6, defending the g7 pawn, but in a different way. He lines it up with the rook, and bishop c5 is coming next.
It is coming next, but he now has lost the right to castle kingside, and relinquishing that idea, I think, might long-term come back to haunt him, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. And the reason I quite liked f6 here is not because it was necessarily threatening any pawn pushes, it was because it controlled white's pieces, it took squares away. And, okay, still pressure on Magnus how to answer black's bishop coming out with a gain of tempo next move. Bishop c5 will hit the white queen. But, yeah, there are a few ways to stop that. And Magnus does have a lot of time to deal with this latest twist, this latest turn.
And when you play this kind of an opening and this kind of a sequence with the black pieces, again, you have to be so precise in the follow-ups, because otherwise you'll just land up down material in the position. And yes, for Magnus Carlsen, the task is clear. He needs to stop the most immediate threat. You said there are several ways to do it. One comes to my mind: get that knight from b2 to the center of the board, knight d3. I not only control the c5 square, but also the e5 square, and overprotect the f2 square.
I love it. Multi-purpose moves are the most effective in chess, covering the c5 square and this one, of course, and like you say, just everything, controlling everything. And also, if you get greedy later, you might as well at least hint that you can take a pawn. And now I think Maxime will be regretting not having his pawn on f6, because suddenly a launch pad has appeared. I don't see any drawbacks behind this move at all. The only thing I can see that maybe justifies Maxime's decision to play rook g8 would be to, well, Magnus jumps forward. I was going to say to jump to kind of push his g-pawn in order to try and get his bishop on the long diagonal, a really promising diagonal. But, okay, Magnus does not allow this. He first jumps in with his knight. And what is the idea? He's got something up his sleeve, surely, to meet bishop c5, attacking this white queen. What is it? He only has one safe square. If he drops back, the black knight might come and start forking.
Queen hits 7.
Yeah, maybe it's this. Queen to h7, hitting the undefended rook. Magnus has seen deeper.
Magnus on his queen moves. He knows how to land them at the right place. And bishop c5, queen d3, I really like the idea, because that's the added drawback, right, of that rook moving from h8 to g8, that you lose control of the h7 square.
Yeah, just really clever play there from Magnus. And both players playing pretty quickly, despite the fact it's got a bit wild. White with black there, sorry, with the piece sacrifice. Do you think it was a case of Maxime knowing that this piece sacrifice existed? Maybe it was in his notes, he was trying to remember, but the details are a bit fuzzy. Maybe he hasn't looked at it for a long time.
Yeah, very possible. And it could be an idea that existed in a similar but different position. And the thing with knight off is that small differences are actually really big differences. And here he goes into a think right after sacrificing a piece, and it could backfire. But it's still early to call, David, because there is still a lot of activity for black. I like the move bishop to c5. I think we're going to see that on the board simply through process of elimination. I'm kind of struggling to find another active move for black instead of bishop c5.
Yeah, if he hasn't brought the black knight to c3 so far, he's probably never going to do that. So Maxime in calculation mode. That's his calculation pose where he's just counting bishop c5, going d3, all those moves. But yeah, there we go. It's on the board. Magnus, will he retreat his queen? As we're expecting, the fact that paused queen sacrifice. Magnus Carlsen surprising us, not retreating to a passive square, gives up his queen, and then Maxime gives the queen straight back. That was action replay because the dust has settled now, but I mean, the players, they're so good, they're another level. They saw all of that, and it wasn't obvious at all. The queen retreating to d3 was the move we expected, the only safe square, but Magnus, of course, surprised us. Queen takes knight, giving up his queen for 2 pieces. Knight takes d7 now, so he's got a bishop and a knight for that queen. All sorts of threats, such as hitting this bishop. Maxime did not even hesitate, giving the queen back for the knight and a rook this time. Let's do some counting. Tanya, help me out. Mathematics, unlike Maxime, is not my strong forte here.
So Black's got a rook, David, and how many pawns is that? That's 4, 7 to 5. So a rook and 2 pawns, that's 7 points for Black, and White's got a bishop and a knight, so 6 points for White here. Doing the math, Black does have an edge, but if White is able to get the minor pieces active, I think it's going to be White with the advantage here. You want to develop your bishop, you want to develop your rook, and line it all up against Black's king. Get that knight into the center of the game, either via a4 or c4 to e5. I would prefer White despite that 1-point mathematical deficit.
Yeah, and I think here it's just the fact that the pawns are not rolling anytime soon. This looks like a strong passed pawn, but it might get hit. The other pawns won't be joining it for a while, and it's more about the pieces. White simply has a knight and bishop, 2 very strong pieces, especially on those outposts you mentioned, Tanya, and Black just has 1 rook, so 2 versus 1 in terms of piece play. And still have to be careful before the pawns roll, but Magnus should be pretty happy. He does park his knight on a beautiful square, beautiful outpost, trying to come in.
You guys seem very excited about what's happening on the board right now. These two look so calm. What's happening on the inside of them? Are they sort of, bursting as well?
That's why they're there and we're here, Kaya. Because they know exactly what they're doing and the speed with which that queen sacrifice happened and the return of the queen sacrifice happened. And David, for me, that was the shocking moment. We kind of went through it, but I still want to go back and understand a little bit for everyone watching as well. Then why did Maxime have to give up the queen at that point?
Yeah, this is the current position. Let's backtrack. We saw Magnus give up his queen just for 1 knight and then a bishop. But yeah, the big question here, Tanya, is why not keep the black queen? She feels a bit uncomfortable stared down by a rook right now. She took this white knight, but if she moved out of the way defending her bishop, what is next for white? It's a mystery. For example, we could maybe just see a trade and the white knight come forward. Here we would see a weird material imbalance of queen for 3 pieces. Black has a queen, white has a knight and 2 bishops. So again, 9 for 9 there pretty much, but it's all about the activity of the pieces. Maybe he was just tapping in and the black king's still not entirely safe. So instead of this material imbalance, he goes for a different one where he's actually material up. But yeah, if you can have a queen, I think most, 99% of us would take the queen.
But that's really nicely pointed out and explained, David, that those 3 pieces against Black's king with the rooks also joining in the open line, that's something that Maxime did not want because White would be the one with the initiative in that position. So instead he decided none of that, gives the queen back. Mikhail, that was awesome to watch. Wow.
Yeah, this is another level. Those types of decisions, firstly, you've got to see that you can sacrifice the queen. That takes a few minutes. You've got to evaluate. That's really difficult. And then you've got to calculate. And these players played it in 30 seconds. And of course, really, really strong moves. No big mistakes. And I think, Kaya, you mentioned also on the camera, the players looking really calm. I think in a lot of sports, in a lot of top kind of elite sports, they try and control their breathing. They might not actively do it, but you can't kind of have a high heart rate and play a long kind of rapid game like this at high level. At some point, you have to calm yourself down. You have to be focused. You have to make rational decisions. If you get too excited, too emotional, then things collapse.
So do you think they are using that? I know Magnus previously has sort of been into yoga and meditation and stuff like that. Do you think he is actively using breathing?
I know a lot of players do. Gukesh, I think, meditates. Eric Geisy, Vidit.
Yeah, it's definitely helpful. But I also think about these
top players, right? These, especially the top 10 players, they really thrive in these high pressure situations. To be the best in the world, I think your best has to come out in situations like these. You can't really get nervous and let your nerves get the better of it. And we see that time and time again with Magnus, also with Maxime. There's absolute fire. All hell has broken loose in the position, and we're all freaking out as commentators, as audience enjoying it, but there's no reaction because in their mind it's just, I think it just really brings out their ability to control themselves and to calm themselves down and just really the best in them, and that's why they're champions.
Yeah. And they probably enjoy it as well, right? When it is fire on the board. I was actually going to ask right before Magnus sacrificed his queen if it was sort of giving Maxime an edge that he had sacrificed a piece because, well, if I lose this game, then at least I played something beautiful.
That's true. A lot of players, it takes the pressure. The opponents can't deal with that. Players like Dubov, who's always throwing pawns away, it's like less responsibility every move, and your opponent is terrified they'll fall victim to a brilliant victory, a brilliant game.
So again, is it a mind game by Magnus then to sacrifice himself so he sort of gets, levels the mind games again?
Yeah, and one secret I will reveal about Magnus, just from knowing him, chatting with him, and watching his games, is he loves to sacrifice his queen. As long as he gets 2 pieces in return and some kind of positional compensation, he'll happily give his queen away. He kind of gets a kick out of it. I'm not sure exactly why. It seems to work for him, not for me, unfortunately. Those queen blunders. But yeah, he loves going for that. And I think Maxime Vachier-Lagrave as well, he'll never back down from a challenge. And the fact he saw the counter sacrifice, giving back the queen and a roughly level position, really shows his class.
Yeah, and it's also about just what's happening on the board. If they feel like that's the best alternative, that's the best option, so concrete, just calculated till the end. Neither of these players wants to go into a passive position, wants to defend long term, so they always go for these combative options. It's very interesting what you said about playing beautiful chess, playing these sacrifices, and even if it goes wrong, thinking that, you know what, you get the beauty prize. But I think it was Magnus who said that the beauty prize is not good enough. Just playing beautiful chess and justifying it to yourself if you end up losing, that at least you played a beautiful game, just doesn't make the cut.
Yeah, that's the sports aspect to the game that we know Magnus loves.
Yeah, but he's getting older. He's won everything. So now I think the only thing left is beautiful games. He's definitely got his legacy on his mind. I think he wants to win a few more stunners before he retires.
What's more important, David, to play a beautiful game or to get the win in? What would you rather? Play a really nice game and then just mess it up in one move and then the result doesn't go your way, but you do get a brilliancy prize for that, or just to play a really crap game but win in the end?
I mean, I'm not known for my beautiful games, so easy answer. It's all about those 100-move grinds that send people to sleep, that my opponent's yawning, and definitely no beauty prizes there. It's all about the result. How about you, Tanya?
I would take the win. I would take the win because chess is such a cruel game, right? I think at every level we've had this, we've been so proud of our play for 40 moves, and then you make one inaccuracy and it all just goes down the drain. None of it really matters, and it's heartbreaking, and nobody cares about how beautiful the game was. So yeah, definitely taking the win.
Yeah. And this one, will it be a winner in this game, or will we have a third draw? What do you think?
Likely right now. I'm not sure. I mean, the evaluation bar slightly prefers white, but I'm not sure in practical terms whose position is easier to play. White has the 2 bishops, which usually triumph over a rook, but look at that massive black pawns on the king side. White is doing a good job right now. Magnus is kind of prioritizing blockading. Those white bishops are blockading the advance of black's pawns, but if they ever get motoring, if the black pawns ever cross into the white half, then the tables could turn. So it's not clear what next. I really like what Maxime's been doing. He's just kind of sitting on the position right now, and he's making it hard for White to improve.
Making it hard for White to improve, and the one way I thought White could improve is snap up one of the pawns. I was thinking about just bishop takes that pawn on the king side, and then I realized that, wait a second, black can actually pin that bishop on with rook h8, and it might not work, but there's actually a counter trick in that position, David, because I think rook h8, we have bishop h6 on the board, by the way. I thought rook h8 runs into bishop g5.
Yeah, a check. And this bishop, of course, can be taken, but the white rook can now capture the black rook on h8. with impunity. The problem is, maybe this black pawn is starting to roll. I mean, this is such a crazy position. How is the evaluation bar still almost in the center? White is a bishop up. I don't understand. But maybe these pawns are rolling.
That's crazy, right?
A bishop for a pawn, and yet the evaluation bar says still should be a draw with best play. Maybe the black king comes, the black pawn rolls. But, I mean, it would be so hard for Maxime Vachier-Lagrave to go for this. A whole bishop down. If he plays this move, rook to h8, he is superhuman. He's another level, and he would be in top form.
Yeah. I look at eval bars in these kind of positions, and I just give up on life. Chess is hard.
Chess is hard. It's the most natural move here, rook h8, but yeah, I don't see him going for this. Once you see bishop to g5 check, getting out of the way, then taking this rook next, you stop calculating, no matter how good a player you are. But, okay, what's he going to go for? It looks like he's about to move. Maxime, 4 minutes each.
He's reaching out, but if not rook to h8, then white just anyway falls back with the bishop, activating his own rook, and Maxime does go for counterattack against the other bishop on e2.
And this bishop will most likely move. It doesn't necessarily need to move. I'm not sure if it's actually a threat to take it, because white will have this bishop g5 check idea that we
tricky.
pointed out a moment ago. But of course, if a piece is attacked, first instinct, run. Or defend it. But the bishop gains time against black's rook, which will go back.
Black's rook has to watch out, right? Because you want to stay connected to that g5 square that you pointed out earlier. Bishop g5 is also a threat in the position, so expecting Maxime to move the rook along the g line.
Somewhat. He's through 3 or 4 safe squares. He drops back, hitting the white bishop. Very logical, but the evaluation bar again heading in white's favor. I mean, I would take the bishop pair all day long, just like our viewer there in the chat. But those black pawns, if they do roll, just one more move. If black can ever get f4 successfully, it's a full 360 turn. So the stakes are high.
And that's what Maxime's relying on, right? Those two central pawns. Because without that, it's pretty much game over. So those two pawns keep the white bishops tied down to the defense of them rolling forward. But Magnus, he's jumping around, shuffling around with the bishop. First threatening a check on one side and now entering from the other side. Bishop c5 in the air. The rook jumping onto h7. Joining the attack. There can be fire against black's king, even though there's such few material on the board.
Yeah, after all, white does, kind of forgetting pawns for a second, white does have 3 pieces against black's 2, and the 2 bishops are great attacking pieces.
Rook h7, rook f7, now mating net.
Mating net around the black king, potentially. Let's just show that type of idea. If Maxime is careless, of course he won't be, but if he just plays
Oh, Magnus reacts here.
Ooh, maybe he's missed something. If Maxime were to just make a random move, let's say he repeats, then the white rook could come in and behind, and, okay, the evaluation bar reacts, but this would have been a mating pattern. At least black now entering the center. Whoops, my arrows are crazy today. But pawn to f4 in the air, still not immediately a threat, but white goes behind. He's going for those ideas you mentioned, Tanya.
He is, and now f4 is actually met by this deadly check, which will end up winning one of the 2 pawns. So if you go f4, you give a check, the king has to fall back, and then the f4 pawn. Well, he goes for f4.
Whoa. Really dastardly trap here.
So what move are we looking for now?
Magnus will give the check. I'm pretty sure this was his plan, but I think here he will realize that this pawn is poisoned. He cannot allow a check on this g1 square. If the bishop is distracted, then black suddenly would turn things around. And we talked about 2 bishops. 2 rooks also know how to deliver checkmate, and this would be game over. Magnus, I think, has missed this. Maxime, to spot this instantly, shows his calculation skills, but also just how strong he is tactically.
Tactically, just so sharp. Maxime Vachier-Lagrave finding this kill zone for white's king with just seconds on the clock. And I think it's now that Magnus realizes that rook h5 just doesn't get him what he wants, which means that actually Maxime has managed to push the pawns ahead. And we've got the eval bar saying that Magnus is winning, but if you're playing this position from a practical standpoint, once black gets a successful f4 in, you start sweating.
Yeah, the main thing going in Magnus's head is not that I'm better, I have an advantage, it's I missed something. That is the key now for Magnus, and he does give this check, but if he takes this pawn, he'll lose. He doesn't take the bait there, and he finds the best move, gaining time against black's rook. That being said, black's pawns are pretty impressive right now, so if black can survive the next few moves and get them rolling, then Maxime still has a chance. Again, such high quality play, both players seeing everything right now. Still 0 blunders this whole match.
Magnus finding bishop b6 just incredible. Also, not only just attacking that rook on d8, but you want to guard that g1 square, not allow black's rooks to line up on the 8th rank. And these bishops can start sort of coordinating together to start hitting the black rook. Rook d7, you can ask more questions. Bishop to b5, it's just not so easy for the rooks to feel comfortable once the bishops start coming after them. But he takes a pawn, but doesn't this allow...
Ooh, and the evaluation bar is getting confused here. The black pawns are rolling. I think there was no mating net there because white would have eliminated the remaining black pawn, the pawn on b4, and white's king would have had some breathing space. So Maxime, he's going all in. He's thrown all of his chips behind his pawns here in the center, and they're rolling.
But it's the black king, David. There can be a mating net with the two bishops and the rook trying to line up against black's king, but I'm not seeing it.
The good thing for Magnus is these pawns, they're rolling, but he can give up one of his bishops for them, and he should be relatively safe there. He plays the most natural check, but the evaluation bar says no. How frustrating is this? The black king has only got 2 safe squares. It gains time against the white rook. And now, does Maxime make a new queen? No, he doesn't. Crazy move here. Don't take this black rook. Black will make a new queen. This rook is poisoned, and the other black pawn is going to roll.
I love that move by Maxime. Just offering his rook, you can't take it. And as you said, it defends the e-pawn, wanting to go e6 next. And the bar is just going crazy. There's a bit of yo-yo going on, and nobody knows what's happening.
Yo-yo, YOLO, it's one of those games, one of those positions in Tanya. I'm just going to jump in very quickly to point out a crazy tactic that Maxime Vachier-Lagrave actually missed just a few turns ago. Here he played rook to e1, a move we really like, defending this pawn. He could have played the insane rook to d3. This isn't me, don't worry, it's the computer. Rook to d3, and black makes a new queen. You simply give up your rook to cut the connection with the bishop and this promotion square. Watch out for this to arise later. The evaluation bar says still complicated, but yeah, it's just that type of position. Tricks all over the shop.
That's stunning. Rook d3. Oh, what a move. But you can't fault Maxime for not finding that one. And now Magnus lines it up against the f2 pawn. Black can start advancing the e pawn. If there's a possibility for Magnus to sacrifice one of his bishops for the pawn, I think white will actually have the advantage because you've got these 3 pawns on the queen side. So Maxime needs to keep these 2 pawns alive and keep the pieces distracted defending them.
Yeah, maybe each black pawn will cost white one of his bishops. And then we'd see a crazy scenario with white having a rook and 3 pawns versus 2 black rooks. But yeah, so hard to play this position from both sides.
I would just rather be me commentating on this. Good answer, Tanya. Very good.
I'd rather be at home watching on the sofa. This is a crazy position. There's just no easy moves. Oh, black.
Was that a blunder?
Makes a blunder, but why is this a mistake? It looks very natural. Trying to eliminate one of white's bishops. The bishops are the only pieces that stop black's pawns. It looks like a very logical move to me, but maybe this is the refutation.
It's so nice because it's all about the intermezzo. If you take that bishop on c4, white will not recapture the rook, but go bishop takes e3 with a check.
Key moment, he had. And here we go. White simply takes that black rook. White's rook. Remember, rooks behind pass pawns, they control everything, and suddenly Magnus's queenside pawns will run. Black is too slow in this race.
And Maxime knows it. He looks away. It has been an up and down roller coaster game, but I think the ride is coming to an end now for Maxime. With the f pawn stopped by the rook, nobody's going to stop the pawns on the queen side. And Magnus there shaking his head.
The win, Maxime resigns.
Wow, we have the first decided game in the winners' final. Magnus takes the win. Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. Oh, he's playing some great chess today, but in this one, he did lose to Magnus Carlsen. Was it inaccuracy then for Maxime that has been so good today? It was just a very complicated game, and either side could have gone wrong at any moment, but the last blunder did come from Maxime, and we saw him there on the screen. He didn't just leave. He's actually checking what went wrong. It was a complete roller coaster, David.
Yeah. It was a fascinating game, a really unique game.
Any hopes of winning the winners final? He will have the white pieces in a must-win. Magnus, with a draw or a win, will go straight through to the grand final that will be played on Friday. Here we go.
Here we go. It's another Sicilian. It's been the opening of this match. This time, switching it up, Magnus. No more Sicilian Najdorf. It's a different branch of the opening, and Magnus will be hoping that Vachier-Lagrave shows slightly less expertise here, because Magnus was in trouble 2 games ago when he last had black. And look at MVL now looking down away from the computer screen, just trying to pick a variation here. Of course, he's seen this all before. And Magnus being provocative. This line known to be dangerous for black. He's not playing safety first chess. Safety first kind of brand here.
It's a Sil for the kill. There is no safety first brand when it comes to open Sicilians, and Maxime taking it head on. He does slow down after this move bishop to b7. David, I'm not super familiar with this theory. After white gets the knight to e4, you said it's known to be dangerous for black. What are the dangers in these positions?
It's mostly the holes, the dark squared holes around black's king, and I think we might see those exploited by Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, or at least an attempt to get at them over the next few turns. Magnus had this opening last Champions Chess Tour event. I'm trying to remember the opponent. I think it might have been Alariza Faruja, but either way, it was a complicated game. Magnus was on the ropes there and did manage to survive eventually. But yeah, let's just jump in while Maxime thinks, having been surprised by this last move. It's all about this hole, especially in particular. The white knight wants to get at it and jumps in instantly. Good timing. I was a bit lucky there. The black bishop does remove that piece though, and now the key is this piece. It's locked in. Magnus wants to break out with this pawn push. I think this is the main move, if I know my opening theory, because you don't want to allow white time to push back this knight and then fix a pawn on the c5 square. Your bishop would be dead for the rest of the game.
Yeah, and that pawn on d6 would be such a stronghold in the position. You just cannot give white the time to advance in with that c pawn. So expecting black to push c5, is that super critical? And it's on the board, so Magnus does realize that. Maxime can still push that knight out of the way. c4 still in the air.
Yeah, c4 still in the air. The black knight will retreat. I'm not sure exactly where, but most likely this way. And at least now Magnus does have the advantage of this bishop being on a great diagonal. This white pawn as well looks mightily strong, but could be a weakness long term in the endgame. So yeah, really imbalanced position. Magnus not playing safe chess, as we mentioned. He's taking risks. He's so principled. He's playing the opponent, not the tournament situation. I think that's instructive, a lesson for everyone.
At least he has great air quality, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. He's gonna need it to win this game against the great Magnus Carlsen. And talking about great people, we did see that interview with Vichy Anand. I thought it was so interesting how he said that the replacement rate will be much faster going forwards now, that people will stay for a shorter period of time in the top. Now for these two, Magnus and MBL, how long do you expect those two to be, inside top 20 maybe?
Depends how soon they want to retire. I expect them both, if they wanted to be, especially Magnus, to be up there for at least another decade. In the top 20, but I agree with Vichy. I mean, there's just so many youngsters coming through. It's hard to kind of maintain the energy when you're a slightly older player, especially now that chess is becoming much, much quicker. But yeah, that mix, that blend of experience and kind of energy, still, these guys, they're kind of managing to cope at the moment.
Will it be more like other sports where you're maybe, in your 20s, maybe is where you peak mostly, and then sort of in your 30s, people start to retire? I don't know about retire, but I agree with you that chess is becoming younger now. And I think computers play such a big role in that. This entire generation is born on computers. They start playing chess on computers. Now, if you're not a grandmaster, by the time you're 13, it's time to start thinking about another career. So things have changed a lot. But for these two, for Magnus and Maxime, I'm thinking it's been now over a decade that they've been in the world top 10.
Yeah.
So that's already quite a while.
That is quite a while. I mean, can it be another decade?
I think
Could
so.
it be into their 40s?
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, Vichy, he's 54.
Yeah.
And yeah, he's playing right up there. I think he's still in the world top 10.
He's in and around the world top 10, that's for sure. Gukesh has overtaken him as well as Indian number 1, but Gukesh number 8, I believe. Yeah, it's scary how strong the youngsters are, but they still have yet to displace Magnus. Jan Nepomniachtchi and Ding contested the last World Championship, and they're not getting any younger. I believe you can kind of maintain a level for a long time, but the peak, probably. Magnus said himself, late 20s.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if anyone will ever displace Magnus. I think Magnus himself will just decide when he's sort of done with it. It's so difficult to imagine a player actually overtaking Magnus, even for the next 5 years, to me. But if he just stops playing, right,
That would help the others.
rating will be just insanely hard to overtake, right? You know, sometimes I think, Kaya, that there are all these great players, right? Some of the greatest that the chess world has seen, and they're all around Magnus's age. Anish, Maxime, Jan Nepomniachtchi, Hikaru Nakamura, and everyone else in the top 10, these 90s kids. It almost seems like it's so unlucky that they're born at the time.
I know.
Magnus Carlsen. Yeah. It's like being a football player in the era of Messi and Ronaldo. No one else really gets up there. And same here. I mean, all of these players probably would have challenged for world championship title if it wasn't for Magnus. And maybe that's why now there's this entire renewed thing of fighting for the world championship title. And I think Fabi, we've seen him perform so incredibly well, just extremely inspired now. I think everyone wants to become world champion and feels like there's a bigger chance than there has ever been.
Yeah, it was like in the days after Kasparov announced his retirement. Of course, he'd already relinquished the title. He lost that match to Kramnik, but Kasparov was still the undisputed number one. Suddenly, Anand, Topalov, Kramnik, they were kind of fighting it out for years. It was unclear who the world number one was until Magnus came along. So yeah, it definitely feels like more up for grabs now. Unless Magnus is playing in your tournament, unless it's unless he's really in the mood, in the zone.
Yeah, there's, I think for the longest time, this has been going around in the chess world that when Magnus plays a tournament, it's a race to the second place. And that's just sort of so disheartening for the other players. And really, I mean, exceptionally strong geniuses, as you call, and just all of them in the top 10. World number 2, Fabi. World number 3, Hikaru. Just all these guys, and then they've got this final boss to deal with. Yeah. And that's exactly what Emil has to deal with right now as well. He has to beat Magnus in this game. If he doesn't, he will be knocked down to the loser's bracket to play the loser's final tomorrow. Do you see chances in this game with the situation on the board for Emil to get that win?
Definitely some chances, and the fact that Magnus has slowed down on this last move will make Vachier-Lagrave feel extremely optimistic. Magnus had clearly prepared this opening, this risky line of the Sicilian that we mentioned, but now he has sacrificed a pawn. Vachier-Lagrave happily accepted that gift. White is now a pawn up in this current position, and if he can consolidate it, then White will be winning, simply winning long term. Black will have no counterplay, so it's all about the next few moves. Magnus not looking too happy with himself. He was kind of playing with his hair, looking away from the screen. I think he was trying to remember his opening preparation, the line he'd studied before, but he just doesn't look happy with himself. I don't think he was able to pull that out of the memory bank, and this last move looks a bit passive, Tanya.
Passive, but with an active threat, right? You are attacking the b2 pawn, so rook b2 is something that Maxime definitely cannot allow. Needs to find a way to counter that. The one move you definitely don't want to make in this position, David, is rook to b1 to guard that pawn, because suddenly that queen from f6 can move over to f5, and there's another tactic with the double attack there. So Maxime has to counter this threat, but I completely agree with you that the next few precise moves by Maxime, and he could very well just end up with a bishop pair and an extra pawn on the board. But how do you follow this up? Because queen to c3, I don't know if the queen trade is good or not, but it looks like you're spoiling your pawn structure and giving away quite a bit of your advantage, even if I was to trade the queens.
Yeah, suddenly this black knight is on an outpost forever, and these two white pawns, you might be a pawn up, but the double C pawns give you no chance of ever marching forward, really, and we see the best moves, according to the computer, just below the board there, and the moves we've discussed, of course, relevant, but only one move to keep the advantage. A +1 advantage, though, plus 1.2 there, according to the engine. Significant stuff, and it's bishop to b4. That's not instinctive, that's not natural. It's very rare to kind of retreat a bishop and allow it to be captured by a knight, and this is purely to plug the b file. The b file is open for black's rook. You need to block it. You cannot push this pawn. That would be desirable because your rook is undefended in the corner. So bishop to b4, will he spot it? Yes, he does. Maxime Vachier-Lagrave in top form, as we've mentioned, this tournament, and the idea is that if black ever takes your bishop, actually this only improves white's chances. Suddenly this rook has opened up, and white will be able to connect 3 by pushing his pawn forward to c5, and a very strong formation here.
I'm going to be honest, David, that move was not on my radar. Retreating moves are hard.
Me neither.
Bishop to b4 is so impressive there by Maxime. And the more you see it, the more you realize that if the a file was to open up, that gives White a lot of counterplay. So if Magnus really can't neutralize this bishop on b4, White does have an extra pawn. White's got those healthy bishops, and that bishop might just get even more healthy once it drops back to c3. Another retreating move which hits the queen and stops any play on the b line, and I'm loving that diagonal. Where is Magnus finding his compensation then?
He doesn't look happy on the camera, Magnus Carlsen. Maybe we need the engine again to help us out here, because it looks like one more move and White has a almost decisive advantage. And wow, it says that Black has to be careful, otherwise the advantage grows. That kind of backs up what we thought, Tanya, but the moves are slightly surprising, I've got to say. Firstly, a queen check. You always look for checks, captures, and threats in any position, but it looks like this helps White's bishop simply block, and White now one move closer to castling to safety. The secondary move mentioned by the engine, maybe more kind of ambitious here. The knight jumping into the center, threatening a nasty fork. The knight would land on b3, hitting the white queen, hitting the white rook in the corner. Oof, Magnus needs to go for something like this. If he's too slow, if, for example, he just castles, then your move. Bishop back to c3, attacking the black queen. Next, White just moves the bishop out of the way, castles, safety, pawn up, and a win for Vachier-Lagrave. Yeah, stakes are high, and right now, how difficult do you think those moves are, Tanya? He plays one of them.
He finds it. Magnus Carlsen with queen e5, coming in with a check. You can't play slow moves, you can't play natural moves anymore. Time is really of the essence in this position, and White has to block that check. Expecting bishop e2, but bishop e2 might even invite the knight jump that we were looking at, opening up that bishop on the diagonal, putting more pressure on e2. But David, if I was to block it with the queen, then I'm just wondering, that gives Black the opportunity to perhaps go for the b4 pawn eventually.
Yeah, White would kind of have lost control over the b4 square now. I'm not sure whether you trade queens immediately, but for example, if you did, then it might make some sense to try and take this b4 pawn. At least now Magnus in an endgame, we know how good he is in those. Still a pawn down, still an uphill struggle, but Black has some level of stability. So I don't think Vachier-Lagrave in this must-win situation will offer this trade of queens. At least it's not maybe his style, and I'm expecting this move, bishop to e2, just try and castle. You mentioned knight to d4 being Black's kind of key move here, the move Magnus is relying on. But what happens if White just steps back and forces the issue? Pins, forcing you to trade off the queens, and we are left with an endgame, opposite coloured bishops, White with dark square bishop, Black with light square bishop, but White is a pawn up and still an easy plan to throw things forward.
Yes, but with the opposite color bishop, will it be enough? But I think it would be a dream position. Whether it's enough or not, Maxime will have to show great technique, but just playing for two results, you can take the g2 pawn, but then the rook lines up on the g line and you end up winning the g7 pawn with a lot of activity. So that doesn't help Magnus's cause. So queen e5, you're pointing at the move bishop to e2. Maxime taking his time right now.
Maxime taking his time, we're expecting bishop to e2. Just block, and that variation we mentioned pretty much forced. Looks pretty promising for White, but will he be ambitious? I'm wondering if he's going to move his king.
No.
Surely not. But
David,
what else could he be thinking about?
Oh my gosh.
Oof, I don't like it. I would never play it. But it is Maxime, and he's in a must-win situation, and desperate times call for desperate measures.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. King d1 would be just unreal. But now that you mention it, and now that Maxime's actually thinking about it, and we all know what kind of just how creative Maxime can get with his play, he doesn't go for it. It would be just too much to watch.
Yeah, I think this one is safe, it's logical, and it's strong. And if Black doesn't jump in with the knight now, then White is ready to castle, ready to consolidate the material advantage. Okay, wow, he trades off, he goes for this pawn. But, okay, he's re-established the material balance. The evaluation bar says Maxime's just winning now. There are all sorts of tempting moves. White has moves like rook to a5, attacking the black queen. I think we just have to show what's going on. He's grabbed a pawn, Magnus, but I think this pawn was actually the least important out of all of them. The rook is attacked. I'm wondering whether you just shift across. Is Magnus banking on taking this pawn?
Wow.
Maybe he's trying to trap this white rook, but has he forgotten that White's king still has the right to castle? It still can jump to the queen side and suddenly defend your rook. And Black has pretty much gone all in on the wrong flank.
Yeah.
Black queen and bishop are actually misplaced here.
They're misplaced at once. White's queen comes to g5. You're hitting that bishop. You're hitting the pawn on g7. Now you're threatening a mate on e7. And there's just no coordination. You don't even have time to get your king to safety because short castle also runs into a move like queen g5 where the rook and the queen will line up to that g7 square. David, this can't be what Magnus is counting on. After bishop takes g2, I think what he really wants to do in this position, once the rook slides over, is to further put pressure on that bishop on e2 with a move like bishop f3, try and get the queens off the board. But that doesn't help the cause.
This is a pin, and now White has some tempting moves. I'm looking at this hit on the black queen. I'm looking at this hit on the black queen just to try and break the pin. Still kind of a wild position, still really rare, this type of scenario, really unorthodox, so the players cannot rely on pattern recognition. But it is effectively good for White. Maxime just needs to calm himself down, and he goes for the other move I mentioned, maybe the more natural move, just hitting the black queen first. Black queen only has one safe square to kind of keep this pin. And now Maxime does move his rook. The bishop drops back. Valuation bar not impressed. Still looks good for White, but maybe no kind of natural way now to meet all of the threats. Suddenly this might be a bit of a nasty one. A check from the back rank.
The only thing that explains this move, rook to a5, because for me, rook g1 was really natural, is that Maxime did not like losing that h2 pawn. He wanted to first kick the queen out of the center of that square to make sure that it doesn't get to the h2 pawn. But in that bargain, he's given you access on the other side of the board. Maxime going for that g7 pawn, it allows a lot of dangerous checks into White's camp.
Yeah, we advocate for greed. Greed is good, grabbing pawns, unless the opponent has counterplay. And this check is really awkward for White to deal with. If you block with your bishop, you're eternally tied down here, and Black can maybe even just trade everything off. Nope, not that one. Maybe Black takes this bishop instead, and now starts munching his pawns.
Get greedy. Queen takes b2, attacking the rook, attacking the b4 pawn, which would attack the other rook. This would be bad news. So if queen b1, what does White want to do in that situation? Because it looks pretty forced, the line that you're pointing out.
Yeah, it looks like you can maybe force it this way as well, trading the bishops and then giving this valuable check. And no matter what, White drops back and we have that same position, Tanya. I think Maxime maybe has underestimated Magnus's counterplay. And the black king, which was vulnerable in those other variations, suddenly safe. If White's rook was just the a rook, just back on a1, none of this would exist. Small differences, but they make a huge effect here.
Yeah, it's just amazing how the position changes with that one rook move. You try to guard one side of the board, but lose control of the other side of the board. And now it's all in Magnus's hand, his own fate. Queen b1 check or first trade on e2. But I like the idea of going queen b1 first. Just feels more forcing, David. Wow, and Magnus needs only a draw.
Needs only a draw, and that variation we pointed out with Black's queen jumping in, checking, winning some pawns, suddenly endgames would likely become safe for Black, and we all know Magnus's skills in the endgames.
And can I just point out how bizarre this position is?
It's been the story of the day.
Yeah.
Every game is so weird, wacky, wonderful, and unique.
And accurate.
And accurate. That's the most surprising thing, that the players are able to navigate their way through such choppy waters. Surprising stuff, but impressive stuff.
Really impressive. I mean, this is, you're used to seeing the pieces develop, talking about pawn structures, talking about king safety, and a game take a long turn. But each and every game that we've seen so far, and this one as well, I mean, what even is going on? The kings are in the center. There's a pawn on d6 that White has. White's rook is already on g7. It's just madness all across.
Again, it's a bit like yesterday. We saw some games where players just shuffle pieces, throw them randomly on the board, and they just appear like this. And Magnus does go for that trade, gives the check, takes the pawn, as we predicted. I think Maxime's winning chances are dwindling by the move, dwindling by the second here. Problem is his rooks are attacked. Okay, there is a checkmating threat. I didn't spot this. This is threatening to lift his rook up to g, check that black king, catch it on the back rank. But first, Magnus takes a pawn with check. The white king
to give more. Maxime is just a crank trick that you're talking about. Magnus can pick up the other pawn with the check. The king slides to g1 to safety, and then you've got that big threat on the board. And I think what Magnus needs to do then is to slide with his own king over to the king side, protecting that g8 square. King g1, king f8 is what I'm expecting.
Maxime suddenly looks really happy, leaning back, kind of stretching. Is he like, okay, I've got a chance?
Really happy, or he's given up?
Could be either. He is currently 2 pawns down, the Frenchman. But he's in the flow. He wants to attack. His king is safe. And watch out for checkmate. Okay, the black rook cuddles up with his king, blocking any potential checks. Now it's harder. It takes longer for white to break through. What?
Wow!
A rook sacrifice instantly from Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. This is crazy. This is genius. There's checkmating ideas all over the place. Magnus has missed this one. Look at Magnus's reaction.
Yes, it's just an amazing move. Black can capture it with the king or the rook, but dangers everywhere. David, I think we have to jump in with an analysis board. If you take it with the rook, go on, David.
Yeah, I was just going to say, look below. There's only one move. Otherwise, white has a +8 advantage. The only move is not an obvious one. You cannot actually take this rook. You have to move your queen to e4, but that is incredibly hard. Let's just show those variations. You mentioned, Tanya, rook takes rook, allows a check, only one move to block, allows another check, only one move to run, and checkmate. You're caught. If you take with the king, equally disastrous here. King takes, met by a check, and another check, and another check, and a mate finally, the kiss of death.
Whoa, so one move now for Magnus Carlsen.
And
he finds it.
Wow.
And he finds it in less than a minute.
And the key idea is you're actually threatening a counter-strike on white's first rank. That's so tough to spot. And he also covers any checks. If rook takes rook and a king takes, suddenly white's queen has no checks to deliver. Centralization and heartbreak for Vachier-Lagrave. He thought he was winning. He spotted this incredible trick, and it's, I wouldn't say backfired. It was incredible, but suddenly he meets with just stoic defense.
Yeah, and I think it's on Maxime's face. He realizes it. And David, I think you're absolutely right that Maxime felt with rook takes f7, taking that pawn, it was game over. And it was all a Maxime show. The queen e4 just finding this fantastic move, and it's all turned around. This has been just incredible once again by Magnus.
Another level. This is just crazy. Poor Maxime. He plays a brilliancy, an amazing rook sacrifice that cannot be captured. He's on the brink of checkmating Magnus, and Magnus finds the only defense. And it's such a hard move. How did Magnus find that?
And so quickly as well, right, David? Like, you would see rook f7 and you're playing, you would just give up. You would resign.
Yeah.
You think that it's all over for your king. But again, in these high-pressure situations, Magnus just finding the best defensive resource. And I wonder if he saw this in advance, if this was an idea that was there in his head already. Or did he just find it after rook takes pawn?
I think Magnus is a bit lucky, because if white hadn't spotted this idea, I think his plan was to play this move anyway. So the fact that this move was probably on his radar means that he was able to quickly calculate that it survives, it clings on, it covers all the important squares.
And all Maxime can do is give a check with that rook on e7. And unfortunately, that's not the kiss of death. Checkmate, because that's not a queen, and black's king just goes to d8. Absolutely safe there, sidesteps any checks, and the threat of rook to b1 on the first rank is just unstoppable. There's nothing that you can do with white to stop that.
Yeah, just how is the evaluation bar still in the middle? It looks like either white is checkmating black, or black is going to bring his rook to b1 and win the white queen.
I think I understand, David.
Wow,
Or
okay.
maybe I don't.
Hit me with it, Tanya.
What I wanted to do was go rook e7 check. Only move for black. Double up on the 7th rank because I have one move. And I'm hoping that after rook b1, I've got enough counterplay on this. Wow.
Well, rook b1, the most natural move. Looks like you're winning, pinning and winning the white queen. But this would be a mistake. White can take a pawn with check.
King moves to c8. King e8 is checkmate in 1.
Check.
Move to b8.
And maybe I can come back and block.
Ooh.
I save the day. I cover the first rank. This is incredible. Maxime's found an equally incredible move. He's not even given the check. I think maybe he should have started with this, Tanya. First, he brings his rook up the board. This is really flashy. Rook takes rook. He will give a check, and it is a sacrifice, but white will give this one, this nasty check with the queen. And now suddenly the black king cannot move. Remember, this is a back rank checkmate, so black's queen would have to dive in the way, give its life to block. And this would be crazy. White would now take the black queen, and what a position we have here. Queen versus 2 rooks. Valuation bar says draw, but this is far from it.
This is far from over. If Maxime gets this position, he's going to try and play this out, because the d6 pawn combined with the queen can set up some mating ideas in that, and the h pawn can also start advancing down the board. So that would still be game on for these players. So rook g7, I like it. It keeps more practical chances in the position.
This is true. He has set a trap, and that line that we mentioned, the most natural move, bringing the rook down, would lead to that kind of transposition. White would give a check first, and kind of chase the king into the corner. A check, a check, a check, and then a block. And White would keep his king safe, keep his queen safe, and be winning thanks to this powerful pawn.
So Magnus needs to be a little careful right now. He has to find the right defense.
I think he has to give up his queen, Magnus Carlsen. He's done it already today, more than once, and he has to do it yet again, one final time. He has to take this rook, bite the bullet, and hope that he survives, and he does. Remember, this is the variation. Check, a queen check, and black has to block with his queen, throwing the queen off the board to survive. It still looks scary with the black king disconnected, but yeah, he will be holding on here, maybe blocking with his rook more accurate. Oh, let's jump back. Magnus Carlsen, this is the moment of truth. He has to take this white rook.
I mean, he found queen e4. I think he's going to find rook f7 as well. And it has to be through process of elimination. Just if you spot the idea that the white rook can come to defense on the other line from the c file that we saw, if black's rook was to jump in, then Magnus just goes for rook takes rook here.
Yeah. Maxime, in thinking about it, he's really lucky that Magnus has some time. If he played this when both players had 1-2 minutes left, I think Magnus would have just resigned or collapsed. But the fact that Magnus has this luxury of 3-4 minutes, this is where time kind of balancing the, there we go, rook takes rook, best move. Just balancing that kind of accuracy versus time dilemma is so important.
Yeah, time management in these formats is absolutely critical. David, but once again, this position, I think Maxime's going to try. He has to try. Well, there's no other option because a draw is as good as a loss right now. Maxime, in a must-win situation, he's going to pick up that pawn on g6, or is he thinking about ideas of setting up some mating threats along that e7 square?
Yeah, visually it still looks so dangerous. If you could pick up the white queen, just drop her on e7, it's checkmate. But the problem is black's rook is such a staunch defender here, and evaluation bar moves. Magnus should have blocked with his rook.
Wait, what? Oh, you've got to hide with king the b7 because the king goes back, you lose the rook on b8.
But it's coming at the cost of some pawns. White's queen is going to get greedy here. Magnus saw one safe square. He's going to hide in the corner of the board. But suddenly White's going to get a bunch of pawns. Whoa, really crazy position still. I think Magnus kind of dropped the ball there slightly. He could have just kept everything intact, but adventurous with his king, as always.
It's a crazy position. So if you go back to a8, White actually just picks up the d7 pawn, and then we're talking about a d passer and an h passer and a potential drop of the e6 pawn as well.
He has to decide really carefully now which direction to go back in. As you say, just to point out your variation, Tanya, dropping back to the corner looks safer, but comes at the cost of pawns. And watch out for the white d pawn to make a nuisance of itself.
But David, Maxime can force this, right? Even if you were to go to c8, you've got this idea of queen going to c5 and then giving a check from c7 and picking up the d7 pawn.
Yeah,
and we've seen that.
Yeah, we'll see this on the board. Queen check. I don't know which way Magnus will go back. At least he has the options here, but queen takes pawn still. Now it's on the board.
And maybe that was a difference, that the king on a6, Magnus feels is better placed than the king on a8, and I believe him.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but I do.
We tend to believe Magnus when he goes for something in the endgame, and okay, he goes for the white d pawn now. If this pawn is captured, just to point out, on e6, then black is going to try to surround the passed pawn on the d file. Still some chances. White wishes all of his pawns were connected, but unfortunately they're all isolated. The d pawn separated from the f pawn, separated from the h pawn. Still some drawing chances.
Rook attacking the queen, and Maxime not immediately picking up the e6 pawn, which again just gives us such an insight into his mind, right? That he does slow down. He's looking at options. Most of us would just automatically go for this move. Eventually he does. How is Magnus playing so quickly in this position?
And so accurately. I mean, every move he has 5 or 6 options now with black. And Maxime, did he smile there? I think he's getting frustrated. His opponent's defending so well. And yeah, if any of those white pawns were just next to each other, they could kind of walk up the board. But the problem is the black rooks on the back rank actually guard all of the promotion squares. The 2 black rooks together cover everything, and black does have some counterplay. Black's a pawn ready to start marching.
White's got to get the other 2 pawns up the board. Start pushing the f pawn and the h pawn. Right now he's threatening a big check on c7 as well. It could be a big check in some positions, so you have to watch out for that.
This is still so wild.
Does Black have the time to actually go ahead with that A pawn already? Start pushing the pawn?
Magnus will reveal all. He will.
Is the whole sort of going down for MVL to win this game and take it to Armageddon? Or you said there's still drama here?
Yeah, without seeing the evaluation bar, I would be extremely optimistic as white. But the clock situation, the fact that Black's rooks are already on the green defensive squares, I think unless objectively he has some big chances, it's going to be hard to push this one further into a win. And there we go. Magnus is the one pushing this time. Pawn to A5.
And I feel like neither of them deserves to lose this game, I have to say, because it's just been so fantastic. I couldn't agree more with that. I think this match has been just incredible to witness. Such fighting chess, accurate chess, combative play, attacking play by both these players, neither backing down. But in the end, there has to be one winner.
Yeah.
And Kaya, also, I think the drama isn't over in this one.
Okay,
We're still
nice.
going to see a lot.
I'll just lean back and enjoy the commentary then. Fantastic. What a match we're having here.
Yeah, it feels like there's
The
still some
pawn just
twists and
reached
turns ahead.
A3 in like 3 seconds. What happened there?
Yeah, we blinked for one moment and the pawn, it looked like it moved 3-4 squares forward in one move. But the white king is coming and he's trying to set up a mating net around the black king. I don't really see it, I've got to be honest. But Maxime, he's trying to scare Magnus here. And you've got to be careful when you push the pawn. If the black pawn pushes now, then white could at least take it off the board, dropping the white queen back. I wonder if Magnus is going to even plant a rook behind the pass pawn. That, again, tends to be decent strategy here. Let's just show what happens if Magnus tries to rush to the finishing line. It's a sprint finish here. If he pushes the pawn, then white could check. It's a double attack, and the pawn undefended. The pawn would drop off next. Still maybe a draw, but reluctant to do that. Magnus, he does indeed try to use the rook as a propeller for the pawn in the corner. He's supporting it, and he's just going to push till the bitter end. Maxime, meanwhile, going forward with his king.
Wow.
Look at this. If he pushes his pawn, will he get mated, Magnus Carlsen, on the edge of the board? How is white going to trap him here? The king's living a charmed life. If the white king marches forward, black does have a check to kick the king back. And Magnus, he's calling this bluff now. He's going to A4.
Maybe you just lose that A2 pawn now because your king is stuck on the A line.
What's
And look at that.
happening?
The king steps forward. You're threatening a checkmate on B4 and the rook is hanging.
Is MBL winning?
He's winning. The queen is coming forward to B4. It's checkmate. Checkmate guaranteed.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
And Magnus can't believe it. And Maxime.
Flying from Magnus. Are we heading to Armageddon?
The answer is yes.
Yes, Kaya, I think we are because there's no way to fight this. You've got queen B4, a big checkmate coming in.
And queen takes pawn is also checkmate. 2 different checkmating threats. Black is losing a rook. We saw the reaction from both players. Maxime, miracles happen.
We're heading into an Armageddon and look at Magnus.
Whoa. We can't believe it. The players can't believe it. It's been such an accurate match. Magnus has played fantastic today. And a blunder to take it to Armageddon.
Tanya, you called it. You had the feeling, just this instinct that something crazy was about to happen. It felt like it was building, and Magnus took too many risks. He could have probably locked it down and won this pawn in a safer way, but he marched his king to the edge of the board and was punished.
That was the best king of the hill game that I've seen.
Oh.
Maxime getting his king all the way to C5 and checkmating Magnus.
And what is happening now? Magnus's clock is ticking. Is he just getting ready to resign?
He's getting ready for the Armageddon right now.
Whoa.
He knows that this is over. He's getting his mindset ready for the next one. I don't even think there's a way to prolong this.
You just have to give up a rook. You have to check the white king away, but the white king will happily take a rook. And we all know queen versus rook, how hopeless that is. Magnus allows a checkmate on the board. And we have Armageddon.
We have Armageddon to decide the winner's final. Makes an incredible comeback in the fight against world number 1 Magnus Carlsen to take it to Armageddon. They will now have a little bit of time to place their bids for time for the Armageddon to decide who goes straight through to the grand final on Friday and who is knocked down to the losers final tomorrow. This game, I've been following the Twitch chat. Everyone is just going crazy about this incredible game. It ends with a blunder for Magnus. Take us through
We always talk about momentum. Is that on his side now, David?
It's definitely on his side, but then again, there's nobody better in chess history at bouncing back from a defeat than Magnus Carlsen. You nearly never see him lose 2 games in a row. I think that's only happened a handful of times throughout his entire career. And okay, we're off. And it's a switch up of opening. No more Sicilians. Magnus is going slightly more solid with the Caro-Kann defense.
Wow, I'm surprised. I'm kind of tempted to say mouse lift, just one step ahead. C5 would have been the Sicilian, but Caro, it is the opening of choice. So Magnus wants to try and keep things solid. David, both of them are such speed chess specialists. When it comes to mouse skills, and if it comes down to those seconds, who do you think is faster, given like 30 seconds on the clock each?
Ooh, if it's 30 seconds each, depends on the position, but I would say maybe slightly Magnus, just because we know he got to the Bullet Chess Championship final against Hikaru. He won the Speed Chess Championship, which comprises of Bullet. But Vachier-Lagrave is, of course, quick on the mouse. And if he still keeps a time lead, remember, no increment now, then I think he will fancy his chances. Meanwhile, this opening is something actually Magnus himself has employed from the white side. Maxime Vachier-Lagrave pausing, still a very well-known position. This inclusion of h-pawn pushes, white's pawn on h4, black's pawn on h5, makes it difficult for both sides to castle on that flank. So it's more dynamic, and yeah, this one is shaping up nicely as well. It's really simmering already. I can sense a proper fight coming along. And okay, Magnus pausing, making a bit of a gesture there, and then brings his queen out.
You are targeting that b2 for the king.
About the opening choice or not remembering his theory, or he's frustrated, surprised about something. But as far as I know, this is still kind of within known territory. So what could it be? Is it the mouse? Is it a mosquito flying around? Who knows at this point? And
I was saying don't trade queens.
ooh,
And Maxime offers a queen trade.
yeah, really surprising. That's not the theoretical move. Normally, white just advances the queen 1 square to cover all the pawns. But now the queens are staring off at each other, and I think this will favor Magnus Carlsen. Now it will become more strategic rather than the kind of dynamite type of chess Vachier-Lagrave has been playing and was successful with in that last game.
And now that you've put your queen on that spot, you can't really retreat it because the b2 pawn is under fire. So the queen trade will be on offer, but it's about who trades on whose term. If black was to take, it opens up the A line for Maxime, and that's what he's counting on for the compensation of that queen trade. Activity along the A file. If Maxime takes the queen, then Magnus says thank you very much and captures with the A pawn himself. But queen to b3, I don't think that was a great decision by Maxime.
Yeah, I would even go as far as saying I hate that decision from white. Just, you're playing Magnus Carlsen. We know how strong he is in the endgame. We know how good he is with kind of manipulating pawn structures. And now the pawn structure in the center is fixed. Queens are nearly guaranteed to come off the board. Where's the energy? Where's the dynamism in your position now? I think it's lacking for Vachier-Lagrave. I think he will regret this opening choice, maybe less familiar. And he castles queenside, trying to add some spice, but the queenside castling doesn't look so impressive with queens about to come off.
Exactly, right, David? You'd love this, the queenside castling, had Maxime just put his queen on d2, the square just above from where he starts from, instead of the queen trade offer. Because now that the rook has moved away from the A line, white black can actually trade, destroy Maxime pawn structure, and the rook finds itself not on an ideal square on d1.
Yeah, not an ideal structure at all for white. And you do have more space in the center, but with the kind of lack of queens here, no attack incoming, and it's only black that has targets. Let's just quickly show some of those, Tanya. Firstly, the doubled B pawns, which look fine right now, but they might become vulnerable later, might become weak. Magnus threatening to wreck the white pawn structure, giving another set of double pawns by taking this knight. And if, for example, white guards against that, then black does have a break. This pawn is slightly vulnerable. It's a backward pawn, and I think black can start profiting from this by trading off, first of all. And at the very least, if you just need a draw, you can start trading bishops. And look at these isolated pawns, doubled, isolated. This pawn a target as well. It just looks horrible here for white.
We've seen crazy positions all match in the rapid potion, and then in the Armageddon, suddenly Maxime decides to go for this queen trade offer. And I'm thinking about what you said earlier, Kaya. Is fatigue a factor? That's what we're witnessing right now with the play that we're seeing?
Yeah, definitely. definitely. I think it's emotional as well, Armageddon. I've had a few myself throughout my career, and you often make decisions that just are uncharacteristic. You're overthinking things, and I think Maxime Vachier-Lagrave was so desperate to get a surprise in against Magnus's Karo-Khan defense that he was the first one to slip. And now Magnus is just cynically and effectively trading off pieces. Still looking very, very healthy for Black here. The clock situation maybe the one thing that could trip him up a bit later on. Maxime, meanwhile, just solidifying, controlling some of those pawns we mentioned.
Yeah, but I like this move because now it's going to be you can solidify the pawns on the king side, David, but now there are going to be new targets on the center of the board as well. You need to take a decision to grab that pawn because there was too much pressure on that e5 square. The bishop has to fall back, and the black king can even step up on f7, connecting the two rooks. First, Magnus decides to reroute the knight to the center of the board. The knight is coming to e6.
So logical, so smooth. Things are flowing now for Magnus, and I think even with 2-3 minutes on the clock, he might even be the favorite here.
Would you say that Magnus is being very smooth in this position, David?
He's doing okay. And knight to f8, I just want to point out why this is such a good maneuver. He's zeroing in on the targets, this isolated pawn in particular, in the middle of the board. The other knight is going to hit this pawn as well. And remember, this pawn's just consistent, smooth play. And looking very good for white right now. This pin is awfully annoying. I just don't see any redeeming factors in white's position, especially in a must-win situation right now. Knight to e6 comes with power. For example, if white just plays a natural move, knight lands, also threatening this bishop. And, okay, he's retreated his knight. He's trying to trade off pieces.
Bart does not like that move.
Yeah, really hates that move. But I don't think there are too many good options. He's trying to trap this bishop at least. But maybe Magnus is going to ignore this. Complicated stuff. I think if I were just playing safety first chess, I would trade off these bishops, just move the black knight into the center. You have full stability. You just need a draw.
That's it. And surprisingly, Maxime captures with the other knight. So he really wants that g1 knight to come back to the center of the board. Really interesting maneuvering there by the pieces. Now in this Armageddon, right, it's not about creating an attack or winning chances directly. You have to play on your opponent's clock as well. So as long as Maxime just keeps enough pieces on the board, continues to put pressure on the clock, I think he will get his chances. I'm seeing so much love for both players in social media, in the Twitch chat, just after this incredible match they have played. A lot of people have been cheering for Maxime just to get to the Armageddon. And now it feels like none of them deserve to lose this match because they've just been incredible today. And I think they've really earned that love today. Yeah. With the play and the entertainment that we've had with their chess, I can imagine the fans just not knowing who to root for in this one. Yeah. But do send your love and do send your energy, whoever you are rooting for. Just keep your messages coming. We love seeing them.
Yeah, both players brought their A game, and that's why we love chess. That's why we love sport in general. And there's no better scenario when both players are firing on all cylinders. And, okay, right now, Magnus has kind of transformed his advantage. He did have a long-term structure, kind of superiority, so I'm surprised he traded off white's isolated pawn in the center, that weak pawn. He's given himself an isolated pawn now, Magnus Carlsen, but he's activated his pieces. The black knights have targets and still looks pretty healthy, Tanya.
A really big target, right, on f2, and it's not a very pleasant space to be in to try and defend that pawn because your rook also has to guard the other rook. You really don't have the time to defend it, so Maxime now relinquishing the control of the A line. Magnus gets an active rook on the open file. f2 is still under attack. I do like black's position, and the clocks are also leveling out a little bit now.
They are, and that's not good news for Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. Just to show what white would love to do here is move his rook and be given an extra turn to activate his knight. If black did something silly, then white suddenly would maybe even stake a claim for the advantage by double attacking these two weak pawns. But the problem is you can't move two pieces at once, and if you do take a timeout to defend this weakness on f2, then black is first to strike. The black bishop activates, and there's just too much pressure on the weakest point, and right now it is this pawn which will drop, and if this pawn drops, the next pawn will drop, and the next pawn will drop, and that of course will mean the disappearance of any winning chances.
He did have 6 minutes advantage on the clock, MVL, at the start of this game. It is down now to only 2 minutes, and with the white pieces, he has to win this game. Magnus will go through with a draw. And is that now definitely the most likely?
I think best case scenario, draw. If this were maybe a classical game or a longer rapid game, the nerves, the clock, they do add a bit of spice. Okay, Maxime defending things, controlling the pawns, but the problem is, at the very least, black can trade off a knight for this bishop and wreck the white pawn structure. Again, it feels like it's fizzling out.
And you're pointing out all these weaknesses in White's camp, right? Once the pawns do get separated. But I think what Maxime is relying on is the move, the knight from e2 jumping onto f4 and trying to target the h5 and the d5 pawn. I'm trying to find a way for White here to create chances. And the one plan that comes to mind is if somehow you can trade one of these e3 or g3 pawns for the h5 pawn. If Maxime is able to create a passer on the h line, then we're in business. At least you've got a game in our hands. But right now, Magnus in full control.
And he'll be aware that he just needs to shut down this game. So any hint, any spark of counterplay, Magnus will just try and trade off some pieces. And there we go. Now, saying to White, if you ever land a knight on f4, firstly, pawns will drop, but secondly, I can just trade off. And Black's knight in the middle is the dominant piece right now. White's knight's lacking a bit of scope, but okay, going after some isolated pawns. Maxime really fighting here. What will Magnus do? Will he try and trade things off? Will he just temporarily go passive and defend his pawn in the middle?
You could start getting greedy, right? Because if you do pick up that pawn on g3, which is currently attacked by two pieces and only defended by one piece, well, Magnus takes another decision, but it felt like that should be fine as well with the black king defending the h5 pawn with king g6 at the end of all of that. But instead, Magnus, is he playing for more here? He goes rook to c5, defends that. And again, a big question to Maxime. How do you fight against the threat on the board of the g3 pawn?
Oh, it's really not easy. The last thing you want to do is make a passive move with your rook defending this pawn. Maybe you have to keep the game alive. No, Maxime doesn't want to play ugly chess. He plays knight to f4, very active. But, okay, this knight simply traded off immediately by Magnus Carlsen. And what next? Is he going to bring his knight back around to go for some pawns?
That's a really nice idea, and I think White will have to stop it with his own knight jump to d4 at some point. If Black's knight lands on f5, that's bad news for Maxime. But again, just compare the pieces, right, David? Black's rook on c5, not only defending the d5 pawn, but an active place. It's an active defender. The plans that we're discussing are on the board. Black's knight looking to get to f5, goes back to d6. White jumps in with his own knight to d4, so there's no more knight f5. And now that there's no attack on d5, Magnus reroutes the rook to find his own target.
Yeah, he's looking for open lines here, open files, or maybe backward pawns to stare at. This backward pawn on e3 is a severe weakness. And yeah, really nice maneuver there. I was about to say Maxime's got the best position he's had all game, but this last move from Magnus really rubbing salt in the wounds, saying, okay, I can even switch my focus to the other side. And okay, Maxime, meanwhile, while kind of Magnus goes for the king side, he's going to try and aim at the queen side. He's going to swing his rook across. Doesn't look too effective to me. It doesn't look like there are any clear paths through.
Yeah.
But he's trying.
He's trying, and I think Maxime's trying as well, because he wants to place his own rook on the b line, like you pointed out, and then you've got a target on b7, tying down that knight to d6. Again, I think this is going to go on, and of course it will go on, but Maxime, he's got ideas in this game as well. A draw is not going to be enough. Now he wants to come in, penetrate with the rook to the 7th rank. Magnus, meanwhile, trying to win the h-pawn.
Wow, I'm really surprised that Magnus has allowed a check. White's rook will now break through to the 7th rank. That's the most consistent move, at least. Or maybe the rook will come up to c5 to win Black's isolated pawn in the center. Suddenly it feels like chances. It's no longer the sterile, kind of balanced endgame that we were kind of staring at for a while. Suddenly it might become a pawn race. Magnus, I think, is kind of going all in on the fact that knights are terrible at stopping rook's pawns, a and h pawns. That's why he's going for Black's pawn on h4, but reacting there, Magnus Carlsen.
And often when he makes a face like that and hand gesturing, it is about his own play very often. So is he now regretting this move? I'm not really sure, because I kind of like what he's doing as well. He wants to go in for that h-pawn, and I think he believes in the chances of that h5. But yeah, not really sure what that was about, because you could tell that he wasn't happy about something in that moment. And has he let go of some chance or some clear way to shut things down?
Maybe he's just frustrated that he had full control and now he's relinquished that control. Now it's slightly more random than it used to be, at least with White's rook getting active. Probably still holdable, probably still within the drawing realms, but Magnus, yeah, he's such a perfectionist that any little detail frustrates him.
And not just a 1.5-minute advantage on the clock for Maxime, but at least there's an imbalance in the pawn structure, and that's the best that Maxime could have hoped for. Magnus jumps in with the knight, wanting to grab that e-pawn. The more pawns that get traded off the board, the easier the task becomes for Magnus.
Yeah, he's really trying to eliminate all danger, just going pawn hunting, and yeah, active play by Black. It's recommended.
Recommended, absolutely, and it's probably recommended for White to get active as well. But the problem is that if you jump in with your knight to f5, hitting that rook, then the black rook actually lands on the second rank. You can decide to give a check first or go rook h2 directly, but there is another target in the position on the queen side, the b2 pawn, as you're highlighting.
Yeah, that's the target right now in the current position. This is the big target, and White gives a check, but after the black king moves, first it goes back. Black can, at the very least, capture this pawn, and the danger is slowly dissipating. Now it's the f pawn that is being stared at by the black rook, and in terms of a race, this pawn is so much slower than black's h pawn. Look how quick black's h pawn is to run down the board. So right now, a draw is looking like the most likely result. Just not enough, though, for Vachier-Lagrave.
Yeah, just not enough pawns on the board left, right? And like you're pointing out, David, that the h pawn is just so much faster right now. Magnus coming in with the rook, and the h pawn will start marching down the board. Also notice how the black knight is in good range of the b pawn, of Maxime's pawn, while the white knight will struggle to come close to that h5 pawn because that f6 pawn takes away some of the key defending squares in the position.
And the h pawn is sprinting now towards its promotion square. White's king would love to be on any active central square. I think that's the one thing holding Maxime Vachier-Lagrave back right now. His king, the white king, is so misplaced because he's actually caught the black king in a mating net. The white rook keeps an eye on the 7th rank. The white knight covers any escape squares for the black king. But you need a third attacking piece. 3 is the magic number, and you don't have that. No way to checkmate that black king unless the king comes.
Are we going to see another King of the Hill battle here? Well, it's not about the pawns anymore. Maxime once again going for Magnus's king.
Yeah, and he has to do this. It worked in the last game, and it has come at the cost of a pawn, but he's running forward. If the white king ever lands on d6, the black king is totally trapped. But black's knight, of course, will have something to say about that. Black's rook can check from behind as well, depending where the white king lands. Now a check might be key. There we go.
Oh, and you can't really block it with the knight because then you just end up with a devastating pin, which can be doubled down on. And like you said, that white king is just not being able to join the party here.
Yeah, black's rook doing a great job of cutting across the d-file, stopping the white king from moving across to more useful squares. And white's knight trying to block that d-file, trying to go for some pawns, but Magnus, he feels like he's on the brink of safety. Will the clock play a factor? Do you think we'll see a scenario of rook versus rook and Maxime trying to flank Magnus?
Yeah, that's such a dilemma, right? Even from the from your psychological, and both of them such sportsmen. I don't really know what happens if we get to that point, Kaya, where you know it's a draw. There's nothing to play for, but the flag.
Is that an ongoing debate always in chess, if flagging is unsportsmanlike or if it's just a part of the game?
Certain players have stronger views. The degradation of flagging, I think, as Vladimir Kramnik called it, it's not
How about
recommended.
Magnus? Would he be super angry with MVL if they ended with losing in flagging?
I don't
No.
think so.
He knows it's part of the game. Both of these players do. They are sportsmen, and it is a dead drawn position. We should clarify the departure of knights. Magnus gave up his extra pawn to get the knights off the board. Means it's a dead draw, and Maxime doesn't try to flag. He offers the draw, and Magnus progresses.
After
Huge fight between two fantastic chess players. They tied the match in the rapid portion. It ends with a match loss for MVL. In Armageddon, he wasn't able to get the win he needed with the white pieces. And that means Magnus Carlsen again makes it through to the grand final to be played on Friday. Well, how will you sum up this match, Tanya?
It was fantastic. It was such a great fight, and even this last Armageddon, it ended
in a draw.
Yeah.
And both the games that the players won, the two decisive games, just incredible action all along, fighting chess. I don't think we could have asked more from today. I've loved every bit of it.
Yeah. I've seen people on social media just get historical with this match.